Sylas felt the madness slip away just as the madness minion was pinned under the heavier snake's jaws. Even with his state fading, the serpent didn't recover. It thrashed inside a smaller circle, held down by the python's dead weight. He drew a steady breath. So it doesn't end instantly. Relief came, then caution. The snake was hurt, not finished. He froze. The wound's edges began to hiss and pit, as if the flesh were melting. A python with venom? That overturned a rule he trusted. Constrictors squeeze. Venomous snakes inject. Nature rarely gives both to one creature. He had assumed, and the assumption could have killed him. Will the toxin ruin the genes? He moved in. Madness minion. Gene detected. Fragmented gene. 3, speed F. Attempt assimilation? Yes. Gene assimilation starting. Gene assimilation triggered. Gene assimilation failed. Gene assimilation failed. Gene assimilation successful. Name, Sylas Grimblade. Species, human F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level, 0. Titles, A Flexible Will, A Patient Stalker, Little Madness Slayer Dormant. Physical, 9. Strength, 5. Constitution, 9. Dexterity, 13. Speed, 9. Mental, 9. Intelligence, 5. Wisdom, 10. Charisma, 12. Will, 36. Luck, 1. Skills, Madden Meditation, F. Little Madness, F. Comprehension, Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F. 2. Dexterity, F. 4. Constitution, F. Speed, F. Gene Talents, Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. Unlucky. At least the venom didn't spoil the genes. Maybe the minion had more speed fragments to offer, maybe not. He would track that next time. He scanned the corridor. This wouldn't be the only minion on floor 2. Caution first. The quasi-kinetic tug from his madness comprehension had helped, but it felt auxiliary, not core. Worth testing, not worth trusting. He set quick goals for the next encounter. How long must madness be active to leave lingering effects? Is it a split second? Is it resisted by will? He needed answers. For now, recovery. He stayed near the spot where the minion had ambushed him and sank into madden meditation. Dungeons were tighter than spawned cities. Fewer variables. Odds were low that a second snake would strike from the same place so soon. For this floor, this was probably the safest ground he had. 5 minutes later, he felt clear. The technique eased more than fatigue. It felt like the fox did. Clean. Restored. He stood. The minion's corpse had collapsed into sludge. Potent venom. Good. He was counting on that. He pried the python's jaws apart and set the skull aside. With the antler blade and a skim of blade aura, he opened the rotted body. The flesh parted easily. He worked until only the head remained, small enough to fit his palm. The blood stank. I'm really about to use a snake's head as a weapon. It was absurd, but it beat empty hands. Or running. Snake fangs pierce well, but they snap. He could not count on the venom either. If these minions were related, they were likely resistant. The python itself was dead weight. Go for the head. That would have to be enough. Name, Sylas Grimblade. Species, human, F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level 0. Titles, A Flexible Will, A Patient Stalker, Little Madness Slayer, Dormant. Sharp. Copy code. Physical 11. Strength 5. Constitution 9. Dexterity 13. Speed 17. Middle 9. Intelligence 5. Wisdom 10. Charisma 12. Will 36. Luck 1. Success. Copy code. Skills, Madden Meditation, F. Little Madness, F. Comprehension, Madness, F. Success. Copy code. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F. 2. Dexterity, F. 4. Constitution, F. 9. Speed, F. Success. Copy code. Gene Talents, Blade Aura. Mutated, Weakened. Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. He set a hand on another fallen Madness minion. Sharp. Copy code. Target, Madness minion. Gene detected. Fragmented Gene, 4. Speed, F. Attempt assimilation. Yes/no. After several fights, he'd confirmed the venom's effect. Every minion carried 4 speed fragments. Only the first had 3. The difference fit the timeline. He chose yes. PGSQL. Copy code. Notice genetic limit reached. Increase level, change class, or evolve race to proceed. A second notice pulsed. Sharp. Copy code. Effect. Fragmented gene, Grimblade lineage, activated. Soft gene state, weakened by 10% for related genes. Genetic limit, increased. Assimilation rolled. Sharp. Copy code. Assimilation, start. Result fail. Result fail. Result fail. Result success. Genetic limit. Level. Class. Race. Annoying. If his cap had been 9 without the lineage, sudden burst might have stayed out of reach. Our limits per gene or per type. Speed had started high. Constitution much lower. Was he already close to that wall too? Could parallel genes stack like lineages without clashing? Too many questions. Too little data. Just like grandfather warned. A new prompt appeared. Sharp. Copy code. Collected 10 fragmented speed genes. Fuse. Yes/no. He inhaled and chose yes. Cold pricked every pore. Heat ran under his skin like a wire set glowing. Sharp. Copy code. Fusion complete. CSS. Copy code. Name, Sylas Grimblade. Species, human F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level 0. Titles, A Flexible Will, A Patient Stalker, Little Madness Slayer, Dormant. Sharp. Copy code. Physical 14. Strength 5. Constitution 9. Dexterity 13. Speed 28. Middle 9. Intelligence 5. Wisdom 10. Charisma 12. Will 36. Luck 1. Ascension. Copy code. Skills Madden Meditation F. Little Madness F. Comprehension Madness F. Ascension. Copy code. Gene State Soft. Fragmented Genes Grimblade Lineage F. 2 Dexterity F. 4 Constitution F. Common Genes Speed F. Ascension. Copy code. Gene Talents Blade Aura. Mutated Weakened. Sudden Burst Dormant F. 20 flat points from a common gene. Big on paper. Relative in practice. What speed did a cheetah map to? A raptor. A T-Rex. A blue whale for strength. His 28 meant he outpaced humans. It did not mean much to monsters. With dexterity lagging, he couldn't even use that speed cleanly without dipping into madness. This was the 7th run of Earth. The easy titles were long claimed by earlier failures. Progenitor boosts were gone. If he didn't squeeze every drop out of this dungeon, he'd keep falling behind. He meditated, then approached the boss chamber. No more minions to farm. He built a method near the end. With higher speed, he could ride out the serpent's erratic bursts. A few seconds of madness pushed them into a daze that lasted minutes. Then he waited. One had died of sheer exhaustion. Its heart just quit. Dangerous tool. On humans, could he pull them back before permanent damage? Water helped if the exposure was brief. If he held madness as long as he had against Little Madness, even a spear through the brain hadn't woken a test subject. Not promising. His gaze settled on the boss. Smaller than Little Madness. Sleek black scales with flashes of violet, 4 feet long. All he needed to know. Another speed type.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
This was the first time Sylas had seen a creature with such a strong will, but he felt that was more in line with the theme of the dungeon. The more he thought about it, the weirder he felt that his will was so high compared to these creatures. Didn't he comprehend madness from this place? So why were the wills of these creatures so poor? Maybe I'm looking down on humans a bit too much. We're far inferior in the physical stats, but we seem to have these animals beat in terms of mental and will stats. Sylas burst into action. Madness already activated. Middle Madness didn't even have the time to open its eyes before that rush of insanity hit it. Sylas maintained his distance. This was the strongest will any target of his had ever had, so he wasn't sure how resistant it would be. Luckily, it didn't seem to matter. However, what was interesting was that Middle Madness didn't start rampaging instantly. It seemed to try to resist, but it only lasted a few seconds before it lost control. Sylas' eyes widened. Middle Madness was like a bolt of lightning. It shot out so quickly and in so many directions that Sylas heard the clashes before he saw the streaks. Familiar flashing patterns of fighting, mating, and roaring snakes appeared, but they were much more vibrant and livelier than they had been on the first floor. In fact, because Middle Madness was slamming against the barriers so frequently, it stayed lit for much longer than Sylas was used to. Sylas almost entered another daze before a whistling wind by his ear snapped him right out of it. What was he thinking? He was in the middle of battle, but Middle Madness was simply too fast. His eyes couldn't track much more than a blur of black and slight violet. Middle Madness physical was 42, but it was clear that its speed was a heavy factor. If it hit him, everything suddenly came to a stop. A crumpled mess of flesh and blood fell to the ground. It squirmed about, trying to move more, but it seemed to truly be on its last legs. When Sylas used the system, he confirmed that it was, indeed, Middle Madness. Sylas had truly not expected things to end so easily. Little Madness had gone wild for a long while, but when he thought about it, the fragmented genes he got from Little Madness were all Constitution-based. Obviously, Middle Madness Constitution wasn't high enough to counter the speed it was running into the barrier with. I really was not meant to comprehend madness like I did. It finally sunk in for Sylas. He had managed to grasp this comprehension by touching a barrier he wasn't supposed to be around in the first place. It was there to keep him from running, not for him to study. When he thought about how Little Madness, the skill, was just an inferior version of his madness comprehension, it sunk in even further. The barriers, I need to study them more. Unfortunately, after Middle Madness killed itself, the barrier vanished. You have slain Middle Madness. Floor 2 of Slithering Madness cleared. Rewards: Middle Madness skill, Brittle Gene Elixir, consumable. Middle Madness Slayer, title. The Brittle Gene Elixir was a far better reward than his previous inflexible one. A brittle gene state had a 30% chance to absorb genes. As for Middle Madness the skill, Middle Madness skill, a little bit of madness never hurt anyone. Exchange your sanity for a speed boost. This description made Sylas pause for a moment. The description of Little Madness was near identical. The only exception was that it swapped speed with power. The realization that he wasn't meant to comprehend madness made Sylas wonder. Could he use these skills without the side effects? Maybe. It was foolish of me to not even try. The will of Little Madness was only 6, while the will of Middle Madness was only 11. I assumed they were able to use these skills without killing themselves like Middle Madness just did, so why can't I? Sylas made the choice to try it out, starting out with Little Madness skill first. Using a skill felt odd. It was like something inside you was wiggling about on its own. That something should be his ether moving along paths he didn't quite comprehend, but the system did for him. And then it happened. Your understanding of Little Madness has deepened. Little Madness has reached common mastery. Your understanding of Little Madness has deepened. Little Madness has reached bronze mastery. Your understanding of Little Madness has deepened. Little Madness has reached silver mastery. Your understanding of Little Madness has deepened. Little Madness has reached gold mastery. Your understanding of Little Madness has deepened. Little Madness has reached legendary mastery. Title unlocked. Title: Skills Savant. You have displayed great familiarity with the skill. This skill has reached legendary status and has truly become your own. Plus 100% intelligence. Plus 50% success in absorbing related fragmented genes. Little Madness skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone. However, it is nothing to you. Use the madness to increase your power. Plus 200% constitution. Plus 100% strength. Sylas' eyes narrowed. After a moment, He took the plunge and repeated for Middle Madness. This time, he didn't receive another title. However, the boost was just as appealing otherwise. Your understanding of Middle Madness has deepened. Middle Madness has reached legendary mastery. Middle Madness skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone. However, it is nothing to you. Use the madness to increase your speed. Plus 200% speed. Plus 100% dexterity. I can't make these sorts of oversights again, Sylas thought to himself. Caution is fine. An overabundance of it will stifle me. This world is inherently one of danger now. Without risks, I will get nowhere. It was because he made the choice to dive into that lake that he was given this opportunity. He had to continue being just as bold, or else he would never close the gap between humans and the extinct creatures of Earth. He walked to Middle Madness, placing a hand on its mutilated corpse. Found a cold sweat pooling around his body. Some of the sweat even seemed to carry slight hints of a red, as though blood was being pulled right out of his pores. The process took several minutes, and yet for all his efforts, he was forced to look at a highly disappointing screen. Speed stat has reached 50 and cannot increase further. Species limit has been reached. Please evolve species, increase level, or change class to progress further. Name, Sylas Grimblade. Species, Human F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level, 0. Titles, A Flexible Will, Skill Savant. A Patient Stalker, Middle Madness Slayer Dormant, Little Madness Slayer Dormant. Physical, 21. Strength, 5. Constitution, 9. Dexterity, 19. Speed, 50. Mental, 11. Intelligence, 10. Wisdom, 10. Charisma, 12. Will, 36. Luck, 1. Skills, Madden Meditation, F. Little Madness, F. Middle Madness, F. Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F. 8. Dexterity, F. 4. Constitution, F. Common Genes, 3. Speed, F. Gene Talents, Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened. Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. This is a huge problem. If there was one thing Sylas was good at, it was analyzing a situation and making the best possible decision in the shortest amount of time. At the very least, he tried his best to do so with the information he had on hand, though he was ultimately a human at the end of the day. However, this stat cap was even worse than the previous gene cap. This issue went back to the first and most important point. His stats were adjusted based on the dominant species of Earth. Because humans were the rulers of Earth, all stats in this 7th attempt would be adjusted to them. This essentially meant that just because 50 was a high number didn't mean that it was worth anything. It didn't even represent that he was 5 times faster than the fastest human either. The stats are based on a distribution curve where 10 stat points represented the 99th percentile of current humans. But even then, a single percent of the population is still hundreds of millions of people. The weight of that stat isn't as heavy as it seems. If anything, this 50 number is far more meaningful than a 10. If it's referring to a limit of my genes or the theoretical and physical limit of the human body, that should mean that 50 speed should represent around 50 miles per hour if the science is right. The fact they're the same number should be purely coincidental, unless the Grimblade lineage increased that limit for me, in which case it's something higher than 50 miles per hour. Either way, Middle Madness was definitely faster than that. My eyes could hardly track it, but that shouldn't be its normal speed. It definitely had Middle Madness activated. I also have to take into account the fact the dungeons are weighted and adjusted to match the current population as well. If this was still the era of the dinosaurs, it would have still been a 50 physical entry recommendation, but that number would mean something far different to them. Sylas' mind ran faster and faster, but the ultimate conclusion could be summed up in a few words. The human race had an uphill battle to fight, and an especially steep one at that. I need to find a way to increase this limit. It says leveling is a solution, but I should disregard that for as long as possible. Leveling should provide linear growth, but if my starting place is too low, each one of my levels will mean less and less. That leaves finding a class, changing my species, or there seemed to be another option that the system didn't mention. But when Sylas thought about it, it seemed to fall in line with evolving his species, the Grimblade lineage. It had helped increase his gene capacity. Wouldn't another gene of a similar kind also increase his stat limit? Comprehensions as well. That wasn't the only option available to Sylas. Comprehension seemed to be a great equalizer, skills as well. His stats said 50 was his limit, but Middle Madness could still increase that by 200% when it was activated. Clearly, Ether was a huge factor in one's strength, and it could be maximized with the use of skills and comprehensions. If there was one advantage humans had over the creatures of old, it was their intelligence. Not the stat, but rather in the traditional sense. However, it wasn't enough. In the end, those monstrous beasts, some standing at almost 20 meters tall, still lost in the end. If we want a chance to survive, some of us will need to go further than what these limits portray. Sylas took a breath and calmed himself. With his high will and his usual self-discipline, the ease with which he did so was only becoming greater. Next floor, Sylas appeared on a split road once again. The air here was particularly heavy. He didn't know if it was because his mind was enraptured by thoughts of finding a way to break the mold of these stat limits, or if it was just that the air was mixed in with something different here. Ether. Now that he thought about it, he had seen ether. He had even felt it work inside his body, but he had never really interacted with it in the normal sense. Before him, the same choice lay. This time, he actually hesitated, but in the end, he stuck with the same choice. Now wasn't the time to suddenly get cocky, nor should he let his worry about his stats cause him to overextend himself. He was hauling the python over his shoulder as he chose the forest once again, but he didn't make the same mistake he had last time. The moment the cobblestone path vanished, he dropped the python's corpse and sharpened himself, already activating madness. If this was another speed-focused floor, he might not be able to react fast enough this time. But nothing came. Sylas slowly relaxed and retracted madness. Indeed, he had probably been a bit unlucky with an attack coming immediately on floor 2. But that didn't mean there weren't minions here as well. He chose to leave the python corpse behind, and Middle Madness corpse and the final fox carcass along with it. Then he carefully dove into the surrounding woods. It wasn't long before he found what he was looking for. Big Madness Minion F. Level 0. Physical 34. Mental 4. Will 7. Hanging from a tree, a bright yellow python, about 3 meters long, hung. Sylas spotted it before it saw him, but it didn't lag too far behind, baring its teeth the moment it spotted him. It lunged at Sylas, but compared to Middle Madness and the Madness minions, it was too slow, especially since Sylas had gotten such a huge boost to his speed. The Big Madness minion missed, landing heavily on the ground with a much louder thud than Sylas would have expected. Even so, it didn't slow his reaction. Sylas activated Little Madness. Since he felt relatively safe with the difference in speed, he thought that he should try to test the limits of his body. His plan was to use his fists and the antler blade he had and see if he could do some real damage with the help of the boost in his strength and constitution. But the moment he activated Little Madness, it felt like his mind was being corrupted. It was instantaneous. A feeling of spiders and zombie-like hands fighting for pieces of his brain played in his thoughts. Sylas immediately activated Madness. He realized that without the support of his comprehension, this skill would really eat away at everything he was. It seemed that upgrading it to Legendary Mastery hadn't come without its drawbacks. Even so, he could control it. He dodged out of the way of a second lunge. He had been too delayed to complete his follow-up attack like he wanted, so this was his only choice. A fist wouldn't work anymore, so as the python flew by, he used the only attack that seemed possible. He flooded blade aura into his elbow and swung down. The Big Madness minion came crashing down to the earth, looking slightly disoriented. But then the madness settled in and the wild movements began. The minion became a punching bag for Sylas' experiment. Sylas knew that his skill in actual combat was lacking. There was only so far that madness could take him, but there wasn't much he could do outside to try to battle more. However, he also wasn't strong enough to have a real head-to-head battle. Crack! Sylas' antler blade finally gave way, and he was left with nothing more than his fists. He dodged the wildly flailing python, staying closer to it than he knew he should. There were more than a few close calls, but he managed to use Middle Madness to increase his speed just before he really suffered. He wasn't sure how much damage his fists were doing, and the dull ache was starting to become overwhelming. Should I really go back and get them? Attacking with his fists like this, even with the constitution bump, to keep his hands from cracking like the antler had, and the strength to give him some added oomph, was probably even more foolish than using a snake's head as his primary weapon. At this point, it looked to be the smarter choice to just back up and get Middle Madness' head, or rather, what was left of it. He shook his head. Taking a sudden opportunity, he grabbed the tail of the wildly flailing beast. Using all his speed and strength, his core tightened, and he swung with all his might, cracking the head of the Big Madness minion against a tree trunk. Bang! It wasn't enough. In fact, the Big Madness minion continued to writhe as though nothing had happened. So he did it again, and then again. On the fifth iteration, the Big Madness minion finally twitched its last, leaving Sylas gasping for breath. With both Little Madness and Middle Madness activated, the length of time he could sustain madness for seemed to have plummeted. Before, it was just over 5 minutes. But now, at around 2 minutes, he had already reached his limits. He sat down and activated Mad Meditation. 5 minutes later, he got up and touched the dead python. Big Madness minion, F. Gene detected. Fragmented gene. 5. Strength F. Attempt assimilation? Yes, no. Sylas accepted, and his body seized up. Gene assimilation starting. Gene assimilation triggered. Genes successfully assimilated. Fragmented gene. 3. Strength F. Genes failed assimilation. Fragmented gene. 2. Strength F. This was good. Every strength stat that he received would count for double just purely because of Little Madness and its 100% boost once activated. Maybe his fists could finally start doing some real damage. If my strength exceeds my constitution by too much, I could end up breaking my bones just attacking. I'll need to protect myself. Sylas looked down at his bloody shirt. It seemed there really wasn't much of a choice. He was just wearing out a habit now. Considering how raggedy it was, it could hardly be considered a shirt at all. Sylas methodically hunted down the Big Madness minions. He hadn't forgotten about studying the barrier, but he wanted to make sure that Floor 3 was cleared of everything but the boss first. So long as he was cautious, with the support of madness, his life was never truly in danger. Of course, it also helped that his speed was greater than these particular minions. Soon, he reached his genetic limit of 9 fragmented strength genes, and his Grimblade lineage kicked in again. Name: Sylas Grimblade. Species: Human F. Affiliation: Grimblade lineage. Level: 0. Titles: A Flexible Will, Skills Savant, A Patient Stalker, Middle Madness Slayer, Dormant, Little Madness Slayer, Dormant. Physical: 26. Strength: 27. Constitution: 9. Dexterity: 19. Speed: 50. Mental: 11. Intelligence: 10. Wisdom: 10. Charisma: 12. Will: 36. Luck: 1. Skills: Madden Meditation F. Little Madness F. Middle Madness F. Comprehensions: Madness F. Gene State: Soft. Fragmented Genes: Grimblade Lineage F. 8. Dexterity F. 4. Constitution F. 2. Strength F. Common Genes: 3. Speed F. 1. Strength F. Gene Talents: Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst Dormant F. Sylas needed to defeat 6 Madness minions to create a common speed gene, but he only needed to defeat 4 Big Madness minions to reach this point. It seemed that he could continue loading up his fragmented genes to make another common gene. So that was what he did. Unfortunately, he soon ran out of Big Madness minions and only managed to reach 9 fragmented strength genes, raising his strength to 34. At this strength, he was already beginning to feel some pain through his makeshift bandages, but they were still holding up better than he thought. The current Sylas was shirtless, his original linen shirt having been carved up into thin slices that wrapped his knuckles, palms, and wrists. This covered all his bases for now. He could inflict a surprising amount of damage when he used his high speed in conjunction with his strength. He had realized long ago that these stats had a lot more to them than what was shown on the surface, so it wasn't surprising that the line between strength and speed could be blurred depending on action. It was especially easy to get used to these things when your opponents were all pretty much just live punching bags. It's time to check the barrier. Sylas stood before the barrier. This coming boss likely won't end up killing itself while it's rampaging. If the pattern of the previous floors is followed, this is likely to be a strength-based boss, and its constitution won't lag too far behind. If I want to beat it, I'll have to be the one that does the damage. But Sylas looked down at his fists. The blood-covered rags that coated them looked quite fierce, but they lacked a real punch. The boss's strength would probably be around 80 to 100, somewhere in that ballpark. Its constitution will probably be its second highest stat at around 50, leaving it with speed and dexterity around 20 to 30. These were just estimations Sylas had made based on the previous boss matchups, as well as the minion fights. He had already checked the boss, and its physical was 50 on the dot, just like he expected. That meant it had 200 total stats to spread between strength, constitution, dexterity, and speed. So that was what Sylas had based his assumptions on. These estimations were probably similar for Middle Madness, just with strength and dexterity as its main physical stats and a lower overall physical. This was why its speed had overwhelmed its constitution. Obviously, that wouldn't work this time around. If worst comes to worst, I'll hope to force its heart to give out like that Madness minion. But it'll be hard. That boss also happened to have a will that was much higher than Middle Madness had been. Sylas touched the barrier. Flashing forms of moving snakes occupied his mind again. This time, he basked in it, not cutting it off for the sake of battle. Maddened meditation activated naturally as he was enraptured by the movement. He remembered what happened the first time he really looked at these images. He felt like there was a disconnect between what was happening and the actions he could copy. They had the bodies of snakes, and he, obviously, had the body of a human. How could he imitate them? Did he want to imitate them? A third of the images were clearly images of snakes mating, their tails intertwining and their minds sunken into the throes of passion. It was usually very difficult to read the expressions of animals. Their actions themselves were better tells of what they were feeling. But for some reason, it felt so clear to him. Was he meant to have a partner to complete this ritual of sorts? Sylas didn't know how he felt about that. This madness was very important to him. But he didn't want to find a partner just because it would make him more powerful. Plus, he was a virgin. Was he supposed to casually give that up as well? What was his virginity to the plight of Earth, though? Sylas found himself laughing at himself, something he rarely seemed to do. The only one who could make him smile was that little munchkin of a sister of his. She was always so amusing in her own quirky ways. Being a 26-year-old virgin was definitely something she would make fun of him for. If she really knew what that meant, that is. Well, she's 13 years old already. Who knows what those snotty-nosed kids are corrupting my little sister with? Sylas shook his head in lament. Kids these days. It wasn't as though he needed help in that department, anyway. He was a decently attractive man, successful, tall. Then again, he did still live at home by choice. That wasn't exactly a nice opener. He also liked to walk everywhere and didn't have his own car. He also focused on work a lot. You'd think it was Kesari reprimanding me again. Sylas actually chuckled again. There was indeed someone else that used to make him smile, though he never really laughed around her. He wasn't as comfortable with her as he was with his little sister, which was funny considering he had known her for longer than Alara had been alive. Kesari was an ex of his. Well, can she really be considered that? Kesari was more like a childhood friend than an ex. They had dated for 2 months when they were 17 years old. Hadn't ended on bad terms, he thought, anyway. But after that, they went from close friends to never talking. It had already been almost a decade since then, and he hadn't even thought to contact her about this summoned Ascension matter. Would she even believe me? Hey, Kesari, it's Sylas, your high school boyfriend of 2 months. The world is ending soon, so you should probably prep for that. Sylas laughed at his own joke. That was already 3 times in just a few minutes. It felt weird. He hadn't laughed like this in a while. It was a shame, though. The girlfriends he had after Kasari all pretty much ended the same. Fizzled out with no real drama. Though it was hard to tell if that was because he was always so stoic about things or not. Well, women probably prefer funnier men. If I was going to sell my body for power, maybe I should go for a more stoic woman like me. Sylas shook his head again, almost immediately. He had tried that before with a certain Clarice. Who knew? Maybe he had a thing for women with CS in their names. That breakup could be considered to be his most dramatic, meaning not really at all. She was the kind of woman to make lists about everything, but he could respect that. Which was funny, again, because he had critiqued her list of reasons to break up with him. It wasn't as a ploy to keep her by his side or anything. He was a prideful man, and if a woman didn't want him, he wouldn't chase after her needlessly. You couldn't make a person change their mind if they didn't want to. Instead, it was because he had found the list truly ridiculous. His reply was that she could have summarized it in one sentence. "You're not ambitious enough for me." That was pretty much the gist of it. A 26-year-old tenured professor at the most prestigious college in the country wasn't good enough for her. In her defense, he wasn't tenured just yet back then. That and she's probably not wrong, though, Sylas agreed. Like he had said before, he had only casually chosen his doctorate, and it was taken in a field that was very unnecessary. No one needed venom vaccines. He only really worked on things that interested him, and much like his parents, when it was time for him to check out of work, he never brought it home. It could be said that he was curious about a lot of things, but not really passionate about anything. Clarice had picked up on that and felt like he was wasting his potential. He didn't really have a goal for after securing tenure. Truthfully, he would have probably floated about until he found something else that interested him. She's still not tenured yet, though. A rare snide comment flew by his thoughts. It surprised him because he felt that he was pretty much over that breakup. Actually, he thought he got over the day of. Sylas sighed. The world had just felt boring. How could he be ambitious about anything when there didn't seem to be a point? Was it for money? His parents were already successful, and he could live off their wealth for the rest of his days without a care. Why should he strive for more money when he had more than enough? He found comfort in the little things. He loved his family. He liked running, walking, hiking, and keeping himself in shape. He liked giving his life discipline and structure. He would probably like to find a wife to share his life with, but he didn't want to settle for any random woman, either. He wanted a relationship like his parents had, one that was built on mutual respect, mutual competence, mutual love. In this day and age, fat chance. Sylas suddenly chuckled again before his mind suddenly snapped back into focus. He blinked in a bit of a daze. Had he fallen into a trance again? He had ended up thinking about himself more than the barrier. What about of déjà vu? Subconsciously, he checked his notifications. There were only 2 lines. Your understanding of Madden meditation has deepened. Madden meditation has reached common mastery. Your comprehension of madness has deepened. Madness has reached common mastery. You have comprehended the madness. Plus 10 will. Plus 20 charisma. Madness F. The madness consumes you, but does not control you. Instead, it becomes your tool to both control yourself and others. You, while steeped in madness, maintain your wits about you. Your enemies, though, are not so lucky. Plus 200% charisma. Plus 150% will. Name, Sylas Grimblade. Species, human F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level, 0. Titles, a flexible will, skill savant, a patient stalker, middle madness slayer, dormant, little madness slayer, dormant. Physical, 28. Strength, 34. Constitution, 9. Dexterity, 19. Speed, 50. Mental, 14. Intelligence, 10. Wisdom, 10. Charisma, 22. Will, 44. Luck, 1. Skills, Madden Meditation, F. Little Madness, F. Middle Madness, F. Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F. 8. Dexterity, F. 4. Constitution, F. 9 strength F. Common genes, 3 speed F, 1 strength F. Gene talents, blade aura, mutated weakened, sudden burst dormant F. It seems that the additions to my will and charisma aren't on top of the previous additions, but rather updates. My will only increased by 7, and my charisma only by 10. There seems to be a purposeful imbalance between charisma and will. If not for my flexible will title, charisma would have already long surpassed it. But if it continues at this pace, it's inevitable. Sylas appeared by the side of a tree, looking deeply at the boss that lay in the clearing across from him. It was a gargantuan creature, with a body at least 10 meters long and covered in fierce red scales. It slumbered much like the others had before it, and yet its slow breaths seemed to make the ground unsteady. Big Madness F. Level 0. Physical 50. Mental 8. Will 22. Sylas walked in, gripping one empty fist and a sack weaved of leaves and vines. Madness. Big Madness stirred awake, just as Sylas' domain of sorts descended. However, unlike the others, it really looked at him. As its yellow slit eyes slowly became redder, it truly looked as though it wanted to burn Sylas' image into its mind. It opened its maw and unleashed a roar. Sylas had never met the dinosaurs, but he assumed that if a raptor wanted to unleash a call to nature, it would sound exactly like this. It was a grating sound, one that made goosebumps jump across his skin and his bones grow cold. Then it lunged at him in a maddened charge. Sylas had no idea what threshold Big Madness had managed to reach, but unlike the others that thrashed about wildly, it seemed to be able to focus its irrational tirade on him. Without a choice, Sylas could only quickly dodge out of the way, using his own speed while he maintained his focus. He had yet to activate Little Madness, and he didn't need to. However, he was quickly becoming aware of just how large Big Madness was and how small the clearing was in return. There was only about 30 meters of diameter, and they were surrounded by a ring of trees and the barrier. But Big Madness was already over 10 meters long. Even though it was slow, the space it covered was so vast that Sylas was never truly out of danger for any longer than a few seconds. This isn't good. A useless thought flew through his mind. In the sack in his hand, he had gathered as many minion fangs as he could. It sounded like a good plan, but with this enraged beast looming over him, it truly felt inadequate. Still, Sylas reached into the sack, but the action slowed him down, almost allowing Big Madness' tail to smash his head to pieces. If nearly 100 strength, matched with that weight, collided with his head, no, strength should be a function of their weight. It shouldn't count more, or the adjusted stats would be meaningless. Which means that the attack speed of this creature will be highly limited. A roar interrupted his thoughts. Sylas forgot about picking out the fangs one by one. With a pull, he unsealed the bag, and everything came spilling out. 2 potions and a collection of fangs pooled onto the ground. It seemed that he had made a mistake, but he didn't panic at all as Big Madness spun around and charged at him, leaving deep gashes in the grass as it slithered forward. Sylas pulled with his intention, and a fang was magically pulled off the ground, suddenly zipping through the air and right into Big Madness' right eye. Big Madness whipped its head wildly from side to side, the sudden spike of pain pulling it out of its maddened pursuit. For a moment, it seemed to have almost entirely lost its mind, much like the previous bosses. It can actually feel the pain. Sylas realized that it wasn't entirely bad that the python was conscious. He ducked and rolled to the side, diving over a whipping tail and barely dodging it on its way back with another leap. His intention pulled at the ground again, just as Big Madness managed to regain control over itself. Unfortunately for it, slowing down was the last thing it should have done. As its remaining good, I was ripped through by yet another fang. Sylas thanked his lucky stars that these dungeon creatures had deviated from the path of normal pythons, or else it was impossible for them to be so effective. Well, that, and his charisma increasing to the point he could impose so much more of his will on the world. Unable to see, the agitation of Big Madness grew to the point it couldn't control itself anymore. It slowly sunk into the madness as Sylas quickly dodged out of its way. I can't just use this opportunity to attack it. I'll break my hand. What do I do? There was a good chance that big madness might tire itself out, but the fact it had been able to maintain control of itself, and even regain control at one point, put Sylas on edge. Snakes were known for their poor vision to begin with. Sylas knew this. If it managed to calm down, it could use its sense of smell to track him down. I'll have to cut off its tongue, just to be sure. Sylas pulled at another fong from the ground. Timing it right, he sent it flying into the mouth of the python just as it roared. This time, he moved 3 at one time, lodging them in one after another. Fangs have good piercing power, but cutting. Sylas burst into action, middle madness activating. His speed tripled and his dexterity doubled. In his own act of madness, he suddenly gripped the flickering tongue of big madness just as it whipped its head to the side. He held on strong, activating little madness and pulling with his doubled strength. At that moment, his raw power was truly great. A howl of pain was preceded by a spurt of blood. Sylas already had his escape plan prepared, ducking and rolling again to get out of the way. He tossed the bloodied tongue to the side, his green irises exuding a chilly light. It wasn't killing intent, but rather sheer focus. He slowly dismantled the boss creature, cutting at its weaknesses one by one until it was just a shell of itself. It was completely disoriented, unable to make its way in the world any longer. Sylas controlled 2 more fangs, driving them right up big madness' flaring nostrils. Like this, the python not only lost the ability to see or smell, but it also lost the ability to breathe with any sort of ease. That was when Sylas sent in a second pair of fangs into its nostrils, and then a third pair. He would have sent another, but he ran out. Even so, it didn't seem to matter. Lacking sensory perception, and now having lost the ability to breathe normally, big madness began to keep its mouth open. Mouth breathing was the only option it had left to it, but the pooling blood that came from its torn-off tongue was making it a nightmare. It was too busy rampaging to slow down, and the accumulation of lost breath from its nose and the fact blood was pooling into its lungs now with every haggard breath was slowing it down further and further. Sylas whittled the creature down step by step. It was an almost methodical slaughter. Compared to how he had been when he first entered the dungeon, this was on another level. This was the Sylas Brown he preferred to be. In the madness, he felt he understood himself better. You have slayed big madness. Floor 3 of Slithering Madness cleared. You have cleared Slithering Madness Dungeon. F. Rewards. Big Madness Skill. Soft Gene Elixir Consumable. Big Madness Slayer Title. Madness Key 1/2. Treasure. Madness Key. Sylas had basically expected the other things, but this caught him off guard. Especially the fact that it only seemed to be one of a set of 2. An elixir bottle and a key fell into his hands. The latter was shaped like a very ancient key, one forged of heavy metal and had quite some thickness to it. However, it was flat on one side, while its head was formed of a maze of peaks and valleys that likewise only looked half complete. If there was another half, it would slide into the maze quite perfectly, Sylas could imagine. Was the other key in the other paths? But it said the dungeon was complete. Do I have to find the other key elsewhere? Or can the dungeon be completed more than once, maybe? Sylas looked toward the other rewards. Big Madness Skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone. Exchange your sanity for a strength boost. Sylas nodded to himself. That seemed to be why Little Madness used the word power. It focused more on constitution, though there was a great strength boost as well. He activated Big Madness, and a familiar pattern repeated itself. Your understanding of Big Madness has deepened. Big Madness has reached legendary mastery. Big Madness Skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone. However, it is nothing to you. Use the madness to increase your strength. Plus 300% strength. That much strength? That's a 4 times multiplier. But what if Little Madness and Big Madness were activated at the same time? Would the plus 300% be added to the base number, or the already plus 100% of Little Madness? Sylas soon got his answer, and it was quite disappointing. When he activated both skills at once, or rather tried to, he was forced to immediately stop. It wasn't because something had stopped him, but rather because he felt that the paths the ether in his body were trying to take were about to clash. If he continued, he might have even ended up killing himself. He didn't know what it would mean for ether to explode inside of you, but it didn't take a genius to know it wouldn't be good. Maybe if his constitution was higher, he could take the risk. But for now, activating both would be a death sentence. But would it even be possible for my body to withstand a 4 times multiplier to my strength stat without the support of higher constitution? Until now, the skills hadn't really made Sylas feel uncomfortable. It was probably because the power came from ether rather than increasing what his body itself was capable of. But even if that was the case, if he tried to use this added strength to make contact with something, he could really hurt himself. He looked down at his hands. He really needed a weapon. Or his gaze landed on Big Madness' corpse. He closed the distance with a few steps and placed a hand on it. Big Madness. Gene detected. Common gene. 4. Strength F. 3. Constitution F. Attempt assimilation? Yes, no. Sylas braced himself, remembering the horrid pain it took to assimilate common genes. He found something to bite onto and then moved his intention toward yes. Gene assimilation starting. Gene assimilation triggered. Genes successfully assimilated. Common gene. 1. Strength F. 2. Constitution F. Genes failed assimilation. Common gene. 3. Strength F. 1. Constitution F. A deep grunt left Sylas' lips, his fingers digging into the ground. The nails he had lost on his right hand still hadn't recovered, and yet he didn't even seem to notice as he dug deeper and deeper, biting down on the piece of his pants hard. It took several minutes before he finally collapsed in what felt like a pool of his sweat. He barely registered a familiar, disappointing message. Strength stat has reached 50 and cannot increase further. Species limit has been reached. Please evolve species, increase level, or change class to progress further. Name, Sylas Grimblade. Species, Human F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level, 0. Titles, A Flexible Will, Skill Savant. A Patient Stalker, Big Madness Slayer, Dormant. Middle Madness Slayer, Dormant. Little Madness Slayer, Dormant. Physical, 42. Strength, 50. Constitution, 49. Dexterity, 19. Speed, 50. Mental, 14. Intelligence, 10. Wisdom, 10. Charisma, 22. Will, 44. Luck, 1. Skills, Madden Meditation, F. Little Madness, F. Middle Madness, F. Big Madness, F. Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene state, soft. Fragmented genes, Grimblade lineage, F. 8. Dexterity, F. 4. Constitution, F. 9. Strength, F. Common genes, 3. Speed, F. 2. Strength, F. 2. Constitution, F. Gene talents, Blade Aura, mutated, weakened. Sudden burst, Dormant, F. Although he knew he couldn't put too much stock in these numbers, Sylas still felt a childish sort of satisfaction watching them go up. The fact he had to suffer so much through the assimilation of those genes only made it more satisfying. However, these stats were just a means to an end. Hadn't he defeated all of these bosses despite the fact his stats were lacking compared to theirs? Granted, that was because of his madness comprehension, but a part of him still believed there were many factors this system couldn't take into account. Even so, I need to find a way to break these limiters. What if my will caps at 50 as well? Wouldn't that make madness useless against more powerful targets? He still hadn't forgotten that Big Madness managed to shrug off his influence somewhat, and that was after his madness had reached common mastery. When madness was activated now, his will was over 100 thanks to the 150% boost. But a creature with a will of just 22 managed to maintain some clarity. There was obviously a bottleneck somewhere here that he wasn't aware of. Or maybe I've misunderstood madness? Every time he deepened his comprehension of madness, at least the 2 times he had, it seemed to require a lot of self-reflection. If the point of madness was to drive others crazy, wouldn't his comprehension path have to be more general? Now that he thought about it, activating madness also gave him a keen sense of self that was arguably stronger than the influence he had on other creatures. His stats didn't increase, but they seemed to mean more in a weird way, as though he could maximize every inch of them. Then there were those telekinetic abilities he had gained. That was also a process of his own, while taking form rather than his just playing with the mind of an enemy. If that's the case, it makes sense. My ability to influence the minds of others isn't scaling, because that isn't the point of the comprehension at all. At least it's not the main point. Sylas wasn't sure if this was right, but his gut was telling him that he was onto something. Taking a breath, he exhaled slowly. He would have to explore this more. Without the barriers to study, he had lost his shortcut, though, so he would have to find another way or just take it one step at a time. Unless he looked around. Between the various python corpses he had accumulated along the way, he had too many things to carry and yet no way of conveniently doing so. Once he left this dungeon, he'd be stuck in the middle of the lake, and he would only have a short time to escape. Those animals that had been slumbering and in the midst of their evolution should have also long since woken up. Simply put, he couldn't just carry hundreds of kilograms worth of snakes around with him, no matter how great his strength had become. Without a choice, he kept only Middle Madness' mutilated corpse with him and was ready to leave when the screen appeared, sensing his intention. You have cleared Slithering Madness Dungeon. F. Leave now? Yes, no. Sylas paused. After some thought, his intention moved toward no, just to see what would happen. Your madness is commendable. The screen glitched for a moment before it came back into sharp focus. What was that? Sylas frowned. The so-called screen was just a projection of his mind, so how could it glitch? A hint of worry sprouted in his chest. This dungeon had messed with his mind a lot. Even during his comprehension sessions, he had done a lot of thinking about things that hadn't even come to mind in years. It was too weird. Slithering Madness Dungeon, F. Level maximum, 0. Recommended, 100 physical. Description: lurking in the depths, high in the trees and on the forest floors. They're natural predators, unfettered and unbothered. So scorned by the skies, they've been restricted to a life of crawling on their bellies. But their day to fall again is not far off. Sylas' memory was excellent, and it could be said to be doubly so when his attention was focused on every detail. He knew that in a world like this, even the slightest mistake could cost him his life, so he directly glossed over the fact the recommended physical had doubled. That wasn't the problem, but their day to fall again is not far off. That definitely read rise before, not fall. And scorned is capitalized now? What does that change mean? Your madness has been rewarded. Scorned wraps treasure. Scorned wraps treasure. Accursed treasure scorned by the skies themselves. In its presence, your body cannot be adorned by armor, and your hands cannot be graced by weapons. The madness is relentless, and its fury scorns the world in return. Cursed status cannot be unequipped. Plus 10% constitution to fists. Right then, a pair of what looked like long, dirty cloths appeared in the skies, slithering down towards Sylas, almost like snakes themselves. It seemed like they had once been a pristine and shimmering white, but were worn by dirt and dried blood over countless years of hardship and toil. Sylas couldn't avoid them, even if he tried. The wrap he had used to brace his wrists and fists, made of his own shirt, burnt to ash the moment the scorned wraps touched them. He couldn't even register the pain as the cursed treasure tightly wound itself around his fists, wrists, and a portion of his forearm. Sylas was silent all the while. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into, but he was smart enough to know that it was unavoidable at this point. What a weird way to use adorned and graced. It's as though it takes the usage of armor and weapon as the actions of the prim and proper, rather than that of a real warrior. Sylas looked down at his fists. Did he feel that way too? Absolutely not. His vision blurred, and he found himself on a forked road once again. However, this time there was only one choice. The cobblestone path leading into what looked like an ancient ruin or city of sorts. Sylas wasn't sure about the situation ahead, so he tested a few things on this outer road. When he was satisfied and feeling as good as he probably could in such a short time, he picked up his things and the various python carcasses before moving forward. Luckily, with his current strength, although there was a clear burden, it wasn't as exceptional as it had been in the past. As he moved, his thoughts spun, these changes feeling quite heavy. These stats are all relative. So does that mean that 50 would always be the limit regardless of race? If that's the case, then the first iteration of this dungeon was meant to be entered by someone who had reached the limit. In that case, this second hidden portion of the dungeon is supposed to be passed by someone with double those stats, far beyond those limits as a level 0. Madness indeed. However, Sylas felt a level of confidence he hadn't felt when he first entered the dungeon, and that was for no other reason than his comprehension. He had a feeling that it would be of great help here as well. What Sylas didn't expect was that he wouldn't run into a swarm of enemies, or even some dangerous situation of sorts. As the cobblestone road to his back faded, a ruin that reminded him of the Stonehenge appeared before him. The main difference was that these tall stones were more irregularly shaped, curving and looping into one another as though dancing. Sylas didn't know why he got that feeling, because they were obviously static objects, but it was as though something was pulling at him. Sylas frowned, clearing his mind. This felt like a weaker version of what the barriers had tried to pull him into, much weaker. When he looked around, he found there was no entrance, no exit. The area was barely 30 or so meters from edge to edge, and he could see every inch of it clearly. But there were no obvious enemies or targets. What's the point of this? He would have already felt hints of panic if he didn't understand that there had to be a way out. There was a small, existential part of him that worried that the glitch from earlier might have applied to the whole dungeon, effectively trapping him in here forever. But he still felt that that shouldn't be the case. He put the corpses he was lugging around down and began to walk around more earnestly. Why would I need 100 physical for this? What's going on? He began to observe the curving stones more closely and found that there were grain-like patterns within them, so faded that in the somewhat somber lighting, it was hard to pick up until he looked closely. Once again, they reminded him of those snakes, some roaring, some mating, some in battle. He touched it and felt a spark jolt through his body, but it ultimately didn't feel like much. It was like he had rubbed his feet one too many times on some carpet and then touched a doorknob, but it wasn't anything more substantial than that. Floor 1 of Slithering Madness cleared. Rewards: Little Madness, skill. Sylas' brows shot up. Floor cleared? How? He hadn't done anything. And also, wasn't the recommended physical 100? Shouldn't the rewards be even better? Then, why was he getting the same reward he had already gotten the first time around? Is it the same? The shade of the color is a little bit darker. Sylas kept feeling that there was a lot the system was holding back on him. Titles didn't receive grades for some reason. Some of them were even dormant without any clear reason. And yet, there was very clearly a pecking order. When he got a new gene, it just took its place at the end. But he had gotten a patient stalker first, and it was third amongst his titles, while skill savant was something he had awakened after a flexible will, but it was second. It seemed that there was a hidden hierarchy he could only vaguely get a peek at through the relative order between his titles. But was a flexible will really the strongest? It only gave him a flat +10 to his will and a 10% boost. Was that really better than a pure +100% to his intelligence like skill savant gave him? The latter seemed far better. This was just one of the many issues Sylas had with the system. It ran more like a poorly coded program than something the lives of real people were riding on. But he was even more frustrated with it now than he had been before, because the confusing circumstances just seemed to be piling up. Little Madness, skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone. Exchange your sanity for a power boost. Once again, the same description. The only change was that sanity and power were capitalized for an inexplicable reason. Sylas shook his head. It was good that he had passed the first floor so easily. What wasn't so good was that he didn't like not understanding why. It was possible that whatever he used to easily pass this round could come back to bite him heavily in the next rounds. But it didn't. Floor 2 of Slithering Madness cleared. Rewards. Middle Madness skill. Sylas stood in the middle of Floor 2, stumped once again. The tingling sensation on this floor was a little stronger, but he shrugged it off just as easily. The floor itself was practically identical. The only difference was that the faded images on the stones were far clearer, and he could see them even from a distance now. Comprehension. That's the only explanation. Maybe there was a path to comprehending madness in this dungeon. But because he had done so unconventionally, he took something that should have been a challenge and shrugged it off. Thinking about it now, what if he had chosen this path first? Maybe he would have still comprehended madness, but then, when he got to the end, wouldn't that mean he would have to face a 100 physical big madness when he went through the dungeon a second time? Sylas didn't know if he was lucky or unlucky. On the one hand, he didn't have to face off against truly monstrous creatures. But on the other hand, how many more genes would have been available if he managed to defeat a little, middle, and big madness that were twice as powerful? He managed to shake himself free of those angsty thoughts, though. Setting aside whether his madness alone would have been enough to deal with them after even the weaker big madness managed to keep its wits under his influence, none of that would change his stat cap. Sylas stepped onto the third floor. This time, there was a substantial change. The drawings felt alive and looked as though they had been painted into existence by a large amount of blood. The more Sylas stared at them, the more real they felt until they suddenly began to move. It was so much clearer than the barriers. They didn't fade in and out depending on his touch, but were really there, living and breathing. He no longer saw it as a series of separate actions, but rather a cohesive whole, and it seemed to embody passion in 3 different forms. Passion you were willing to put your life on the line for. Passion of love and affection. Passion of raw emotion, not necessarily love, but happiness, anger, even arrogance. Floor 3 of Slithering Madness cleared. Rewards. Big Madness skill. Madness key, 2 halves, treasure. Common gene crystal, treasure. Void title, void skill. The list was mostly confusing. He wasn't sure what 3 of the 5 items were, and by the chosen words void, it seemed the system didn't really understand either. But quite quickly, both void rewards took effect on their own. Title, void, has taken effect. Big Madness Slayer, Middle Madness Slayer, and Little Madness Slayer have been fused. Title unlocked. Title, Madness Conqueror. The madness does not sway you. Instead, it fuels you. You have conquered the madness. Plus 50 will, plus 100 charisma, plus 10% success in absorbing all genes. Sylas' brows raised. Until now, whenever he got a boost to gene assimilation by any one of his titles, they always specified fragmented genes. But this clearly did the exact opposite of that. He braced himself to hear the familiar chime of his stats having reached their cap, but instead, his world actually went white. When Sylas' vision cleared, he found himself gasping for breath on the ground. Something wet was on the side of his face, and when he reached for it, he was shocked to find that it was a striking shade of red. I'm bleeding from my ears? It couldn't be a coincidence. Will and charisma seemed to have both to do with his mind, and now he was bleeding from his ears? Had he ruptured something? Were his eyes bleeding too? How was his brain actually doing? It wasn't until several seconds later that Sylas realized he was thinking just fine and there wasn't the expected fogginess in his mind. Instead, he felt unprecedented clarity. Skill Void has taken effect. Big Madness, Middle Madness, and Little Madness have been fused. Madness Control, skill. Your body is your temple, and it listens to no commands other than your own. Plus Dexterity. That was it. There was no number, no percentage. It just said plus Dexterity as though that was supposed to mean something to Sylas. Subconsciously, Sylas tried activating the skill, half expecting it to rocket up to Legendary Mastery just like the others had. But instead, everything seemed to slow down around him. When he looked down at his hands, he could seem to see afterimages being left in the air as though he was watching still frames of himself rather than true fluid movement. and then it stopped. He felt an emptiness in the pit of his stomach, and at some unknown point in time, he had already gotten up from the ground and walked around the entire region before returning to his original spot. I ran out of ether. The weird part was that Sylas could usually guesstimate how much time had passed while he was out of it, but this time there was nothing. His sense of time had been too distorted just now, and it felt like hours had passed at least, but he knew that was impossible. He wasn't foolish enough to think that this skill gave him control over time. Rather, it gave him such a high level of control over his body that it made whatever his dexterity stat was meaningless. Maybe that was why there was no number attached to it. This skill could raise his dexterity to whatever it needed to be for him to unearth his full potential, and then some. Equals sad face bonus chapter for 50 golden tickets. Equals. This must be what his grandfather meant by not all skills were created equal. He had just lost 3 legendary mastery skills, and he didn't even know if he should miss them at all. That didn't even mention the fact Madness Control wasn't even at common mastery yet. Sylas turned his attention to the final 2 rewards. Common Gene Crystal F. Treasure. One's genetic code is a universe within a universe. Endless and vast, the number of meandering paths it can take are uncountable. Use this common gene crystal and begin to forge your own path. Capacity, 50. Capacity of 50? Forge your own path. Suddenly, the answer hit Sylas like a bolt of lightning, and he understood. Until now, no matter what kind of beast he killed, he always received genes of the same kind. One of the 4 basic physical stats. Could it be that this gene crystal allowed him to take those genes and combine them into something like the Grimblade lineage? And since it had the prefix of common, the capacity should refer to 50 common genes. Then, Sylas' eyes narrowed. He felt that his guesses were pretty close to the mark, but what of it? What could he do with this information? Did he just have to randomly pour genes in and hope it popped out something good? And could he use it more than once? The description didn't seem to say anything about a limit to how many times he could use it. So did that mean he could experiment? He needed more information, but there was just far too little. He could only turn toward the final item, hoping that it would give him something to bet on. With slow movements, he brought the 2 halves of the madness key together, but he couldn't even take action before they snapped forward, forming a loop of twine around their handles and wrapping around his neck. Madness key, treasure, a key leading to a fortune of madness. Detects other madness disciples and enlightens your path. Contains small spatial world within. Can answer 1 question in exchange for 1 fragmented gene. Curse status, glutton. 1 common gene a day to maintain happiness. Requirements grow by the day. Less than 7 days remaining until hunger increases. Curse status, cannot be unequipped. Sylas' mind was entirely occupied by a single line. Can answer 1 question in exchange for 1 fragmented gene. He didn't care about the cost, he didn't care about the glutton curse, he didn't even care about the so-called madness disciples, or how this item somehow had a hidden space within it. When he saw this 1 line, he actually gripped his fists in excitement, showing more emotion than he was used to. It seemed that the madness had its positive effects as well. But the moment the excitement faded, the flood of questions came. How much did it know? How broad could he make the question? How specific were the answers? What was the best way to test this without wasting a flood of genes? The more he thought, the more niche the questions became. Did the genes have to come from him directly? Or could he use the key to absorb genes instead? And if he used the madness key to absorb genes directly from a corpse, what gene state would it have? Could it absorb all the genes? Or would it be weaker than his soft gene state in this regard? Should he test it with questions he knew the answer to first? And if all questions were worth the same regardless of what they were, should he try to front-load as many of them as he could now, even if it was at a short-term detriment to his overall stats? If in 7 days' time the cost of a question rose to 2 fragmented genes, wouldn't he regret not doing so? Or worse yet, what if it immediately jumped to a common gene? There was no telling how badly the hunger would kick it up. He had so many burning questions and ideas on how to best optimize this madness key that he felt his mind might explode. Eventually, he calmed himself down. Without a calm mind, he would only end up harming himself. This matter also helped to put a great deal into perspective. He was nearing his third day in this world, and yet it was already messing with his mind so much. He should have been able to take this in stride, but he felt real excitement at seeing this treasure. It wasn't just that, either. The feeling of satisfaction he had watching his stats grow was somewhat addicting as well. It was like this world wanted you to get addicted to improvement, to evolving. Sylas picked up the key that hung around his neck. As expected, some mysterious and invisible force stopped him from taking it off. He looked around, probing for the so-called space within, but he didn't find anything until he thought of using his intention to open it like he did when he interacted with the system. Once he did, a world was opened up to him. While calling a world was a bit much, but it was actually quite roomy. It was a 2 by 2 by 2 meter bland gray space. Fascinating. This was the only word Sylas could use to describe it. He tried putting the common gene crystal in, and it vanished. He pulled it out, then put it back in again, getting used to the sensation. This space would definitely make things more convenient, but it seemed that he wouldn't likely be able to use it in the middle of battle. Doing so required focusing his will on it and then using his charisma to force the change he wanted, and much like the system notifications, it would envelop his line of sight. The difference was that the notifications didn't obstruct a lot of the rest of the world, while focusing on this inner space replaced everything in his eyesight. Castle bonus big thanks to Readable and Rolly Salt. 1/10. Sylas put the crystal, the 3 potions he had gathered, and a few pieces of beast meat within. He didn't want to waste so much space on big madness, so he didn't even try to take it in. How am I supposed to dissect corpses now that I can't equip weapons? Sylas shook his head, looking at the scorned wraps. An idea came to his mind. No, it said I can't use them in my hands, but it didn't say anything about my charisma. He threw that idea to the back of his mind. Even if he had this thought, he had lost anything he could call a weapon in this dungeon. Sylas thought about leaving now, but then he shook his head. This dungeon never seemed to rush him. It hadn't hurried him forward through the floors, and he could always decide when it was that he wanted to move on. In that case, this might be the safest area he would have for a while. He should at least try to get a baseline understanding of how the madness key worked. Name: Sylas Grimblade. Species: Human F. Affiliation: Grimblade lineage. Level: 0. Titles: A Flexible Will, Madness Conqueror, Skill Savant, A Patient Stalker. Physical: 42. Strength: 50. Constitution: 49. Dexterity: 19. Speed: 50. Mental: 47. Intelligence: 10. Wisdom: 10. Charisma: 122. Will: 94. Luck: 1. Skills: Madden Meditation, F. Madness Control, F. Comprehensions: Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes: Grimblade Lineage, F. 8. Dexterity, F. 4. Constitution, F. 9. Strength, F. Common Genes: 3. Speed, F. 2. Strength, F. 2. Constitution, F. Gene Talents: Blade Aura, Mutated, Weakened, Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. Looking at his stat screen, Sylas decided that the best gene to use would probably be Strength. He had a buffer of 4 fragmented Strength genes that were lying dormant right now due to having reached his genetic limit. He wanted to test the waters, but he also didn't want to waste his genes either. A dungeon was ultimately a controlled environment. There was no telling how much harder it would be to gather these genes on the outside, so he had to be frugal. Let's pick a question that's been bugging me. It should be difficult enough, not too broad, but not too narrow either. Let's see, how does this work? Sylas touched the key and once again used his intention. He focused on his fragmented strength gene before he asked his question. As for the common gene that he needed to give up every day to keep it happy, the treasure hadn't said anything about it, so he assumed he had a buffer period. Why does the system feel incomplete? Sylas was quite used to using search engines, as he had spent most of his life in academia. This question was, objectively, a horrible one to type in. His word choice wasn't too specific, and it was mostly driven by his intention. In addition, the word feel was too broad as well. However, when given the context of this world, it should be something that an intelligent listener should be able to grasp. He felt a pulse from the madness key, and a flickering image appeared before his eyes. Why does the system feel incomplete? The system is an intelligence forged by the universe, an evolutionary convergence to aid ascending worlds. However, the information the universe can decipher versus what lesser creatures can decipher is separated by a vast chasm. Most summoned worlds receive a rudimentary version of the system, stripped down of its complexities, simplified in its numbers, and made easily digestible for the masses. Sylas finally felt a hint of relief. He wasn't crazy after all. When he thought about it, what kind of system would the dinosaurs have been given? Would they even be able to understand one as complicated as what Sylas was using? Maybe theirs was dumbed down even further into a series of images or emotions or instinctual understandings. The answer to the madness key also seemed to imply that there was a better version of the system, or maybe even several forms of upgrades, but he restrained himself from asking about it. This satisfied one need, but he had other more pressing needs. It was unlikely that he would be able to upgrade the system anytime soon, anyway. Turning his attention toward the common gene crystal, he asked a question that was far more important to his immediate success. How do you use the common gene crystal? Common gene crystals are gene fusion devices capable of inputting common physical and mental genes and outputting a unique gene. Depending on the capacity, one can make more or less complex unique genes, with the weakest outcome being a unique fragmented gene and the strongest being a unique bronze gene. In order to begin, one needs to start with a foundation. This would be a skill, a comprehension, a title, a treasure, or a freshly slain beast. With this foundation, the gene crystal will enter a state of dormancy. Upon awaking, it will provide an evolution tree and gene requirements to meet the target goal, depending on the path taken. These gene requirements will list the number and combination of genes necessary to successfully fuse the unique gene. A gene crystal can be used more than once, but its durability is variable. The closer to its gene capacity you go, the more durability it will lose per use. Chance of succeeding in absorbing a gene crystal-created unique gene is also variable. Gene crystal can be sacrificed for an improved success rate, dependent on capacity. At 10 capacity, there will be a 50% chance of success. At 50 capacity, there will be a 90% chance. Sylas' eyes lit up. After 2 questions, he was starting to get a bit of a better understanding. It seemed that his question didn't need to be too specific to get him a wide range of information. But what would happen if he purposely made it too broad? How do I complete the summoned Ascension? Become strong. Castle bonus big thanks to Readable and Rolly Salt. 2 out of 10. It was just 2 words, and it felt like quite a waste of fragmented gene. Sylas had already fallen from 9 fragmented strength genes to just 6, but the more he stared at the answer, the more he felt that it was appropriate. There really was nothing else to it. Even if he gathered up all the knowledge in the world, it wouldn't change this answer. Why is my flexible will title ranked above my Madness Conqueror title? Titles are separated into 2 forms, fixed titles and growth titles. Fixed titles only function within one's grade. Upon promoting from F grade to E grade, all fixed titles will be rendered useless. Growth titles are not restricted by this limitation, and there will be a quest associated with an upgrade. This will be a one-time quest in most cases, though there are some titles that will provide an opportunity to secure a weaker title upon a first failure. There are likewise some rare quests that might prove an opportunity to upgrade a title in the future. A Flexible Will is a growth title, and Madness Conqueror is also a growth title. However, the evolution branches and potential of a Flexible Will are much higher. It has the potential to be a legendary title, though it is currently only common, while Madness Conqueror can only be gold, though it is currently silver. Sylas' brows raised, finally understanding. He should have asked about the Madness Disciples honestly, but this had been really bothering him for a long while. Even so, he still spent another fragmented gene, causing his strength to fall from 50 to 49. Who are the Madness Disciples? The Madness Covenant is a The notification glitched. Question has touched upon a taboo. Glutton curse activated. Hunger has increased. Sylas' eyes narrowed. The timer of less than 7 days fell to just less than 3 days. He had lost 4 days because he dared to ask the wrong question. How many other pitfalls like this were there? The Madness Covenant is a mysterious organization, one shrouded by mystery. Madness disciples are a contingent of geniuses who have grasped the madness. But this is only the beginning. For the right to claim a seat at the altar, they battle across the vastness of the universe, hoping to one day join this order of madmen. The Madness Covenant. Altar, was that information worth the price? Sylas wasn't sure. This was why he had been hesitant to use one of his opportunities on this question, because he expected that something like this might happen just given the path things had taken normally. But there was no use in crying over spilt milk. It's time to leave. Sylas double-checked everything. Then, completely naked again aside from the scorned wraps and the madness key around his neck, he moved his thoughts toward exiting. From dryness, Sylas was immediately assaulted by a sharp chill. His senses were on high alert, and madness was already activated. He was taking no chances. He was already at a huge disadvantage beneath the water. As expected, the region around the dungeon were completely consumed by large concentrations of ether and large aquatic beasts. Orinoco crocodile, F. Level, 0. Physical, 37. Mental, 1. Will, 6. Amazon piranha, F. Level, 0. Physical, 24. Mental, 0. Will, 2. Sylas immediately found himself surrounded, but just as quickly, the scene went wild. He felt almost immediately that it might have been a mistake to activate his madness like this. With the sheer number of creatures around him, even if their wills were too low to target him in specific, it was only a matter of probability and time that one eventually would. Plus, he felt that, with his madness influencing so many at once, it had diluted considerably. He sensed a notification, but he directly ignored it for the time being, gathering up his will and charisma to propel himself out of the water. His telekinesis wasn't strong enough to lift something as heavy as his body, but it could certainly help him to swim faster. In his slight panic, Sylas had forgotten something. His current stats simply couldn't be compared to what they had been in the past. Even if the water was a debuff, he could still outmaneuver these creatures. Sylas still felt that dexterity weighed a little heavier in the water, but with his telekinesis, it simply didn't matter. He shot out of the water so fast that he appeared almost a meter above the surface before he started falling back down. But by this point, he had already reached near the shore. His eyes landed on the sheer number of beasts in the surroundings, and he made a break for it. Sylas took a breath and exhaled, pressing his wet back against a tree. Seeing the scene around the dungeon, he knew he made the right decision to enter it when he did. Now that the dungeon had been cleared, though, the ether would slowly disperse, and this region should go back to normal with time. I received a notification earlier, Sylas thought, suddenly remembering. He used his intention to check on it. Quest received. Plight of Castle Maine, bronze. 2 S's. Sylas raised an eyebrow, but didn't put too much stock in it. There could be any number of reasons why it was like this. Rudimentary Village, Castle Maine, is recruiting temporary adventurers from the surroundings to wage war. As the first established city of the 7th Summit Ascension, its status is special and the opportunities are plentiful. Fragmented reward requirements. Do not allow Castle Maine to fall. Common reward requirements. Repel Rudimentary, Knoll Village 019. Kill 5 gnolls. Bronze reward requirements. Conquer Rudimentary Knoll Village 019 City Steel. Castle bonus big thanks to Readable and Rolly Salt. 3 out of 10. Name, Sylas Grimblade. Species, Human F. Affiliation, Grimblade Lineage. Level, 0. Titles, A Flexible Will, Madness Conqueror, Skill Savant, A Patient Stalker. Physical, 42. Strength, 49. Constitution, 49. Dexterity, 19. Speed, 50. Mental, 47. Intelligence, 10. Wisdom, 10. Charisma, 122. Will, 94. Luck, 1. Skills, Madden Meditation, F. Madness Control, F. Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F. 8. Dexterity, F. 4. Constitution, F. 4. Strength, F. Common Genes, 3. Speed, F. 2. Strength, F. 2. Constitution, F. Gene Talents, Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst Dormant, F. Sylas moved through the dense forest with swift feet. Both his stamina and speed were exceptional now. The only unfortunate part was that his dexterity was lacking. He thought about it, and felt that topping up his dexterity stat first would be smart. After accepting the quest, he had a ticking timer of about 3 days to make it there. There was a virtual sort of compass that appeared at the side of his vision, showing him where he needed to go. With his current speed, not to mention his confidence in facing the creatures he might face, he felt it would only take him a few hours to cover that distance. From the stats of the creatures in the lake, Sylas had a general understanding of how strong the challenges he might face would be. Simply put, they were weaker than him. As such, it was best to take advantage of them now and reach his species' limits before considering anything else. While he was looking for dexterity builds to target, though, he didn't expect that he would run into an old enemy first. Titanoboa F. Level 0. Physical 39. Mental 3. Will 11. Its stats were much higher than the last time Sylas had seen it. It was hard to tell if it was the exact same creature, but even in the past, Titanoboas so large should have been rare. He didn't know much about the spawn rates in this world, but his gut feeling was likely to be correct. The Titanoboa was a much browner color than it had been when Sylas last saw it. It blended in so well with the bark that Sylas had almost missed it. However, at the moment he was about to rush by, he had felt like a hand was almost trying to feel around in his mind. He had frowned and looked around before his eyes landed on the beast. Did it just try to look at my stats? This was a +1 for Sylas' theory about the system. Clearly, there's a version of it that all creatures could understand, even if their sentience was limited. Sylas remembered that the first time he used the system to check an animal's stats, it had mentioned something about his mental overwhelming them, allowing the scan to succeed. Was this what people would feel when it failed? All of Sylas' earlier confidence was forcefully flushed out of him. If he ran past that tree carelessly and the Titanoboa timed its fall, he would be entangled in something he might not be able to get out of. Although the physical of the extinct snake was only 39, there was no doubt that it was heavily skewed towards strength and constitution. The Titanoboa hissed, retreating back into the tree. Sylas was stirred, and he used his charisma to reach out into the world. With a strong tug, he pulled down on the branches the Titanoboa was using to hold itself up. It didn't need much help. The branches were under a lot of strain due to the snake's weight, and pulling them down was only helped by the monstrous creature. However, the branches of these trees, just given the fact they could uphold the snake in the first place, were extraordinary. Sylas didn't want to break them, though. He just wanted to take advantage of the snake's movement to throw it off balance. The Titanoboa managed to keep much of its balance, but its long tail fell downward. Its muscles reacted quickly, and it began to pull itself back up, but not before Sylas rushed by, taking hold of the end of its tail and pulling down with all his strength. The Titanoboa was already in a state of trying to regain its steadiness, and this action of Sylas pushed it over the edge, sending it rocketing toward the ground. A dull boom echoed as Sylas leapt out of the way, his green irises flashing with a focused light. The Titanoboa snapped its head at Sylas. In that moment, Sylas could almost feel the rage in its eyes. He sidestepped it. The creature was too slow. His fist hooked around its head, sending it rebounding against the tree's trunk. The Titanoboa attempted a retreat. One of its eyes was already half closed after hitting against the tough bark. Plus, the fall from so high above hadn't come without its own share of damage. It was disoriented, and its flight responses were on high alert. Unfortunately, its body was too big, Sylas slipped out of the way of its swinging tail, not bothered by the thunderous bang that echoed behind him as it hit a tree instead. His fist found its way to the head of the Titanoboa once again. He glided around, grasping the movements of the creature before it even seemed to know what it wanted to do. He could feel that it was feeling the world around him in a way that his eyes couldn't. It was sudden before, but now that the stat was so close to triple digits, it was starting to become far more substantial. Bang! He drove another fist into the snake's head. He could almost feel its tiny brain rattling within. The sensation of his knuckles colliding with it seemed to extend in his mind, that brief instant of contact feeling more like several drawn-out seconds. It allowed him to check his form, feeling the distribution of his weight, and even feel how he could bring out more power. Castle bonus big thanks to Readable and Rolly Salt. 4 out of 10. It was hard to tell if it was an illusion or not. He wasn't some master of the fist, and he hadn't spent a lot of time studying it. Aside from some good cardio, he had never seen boxing as anything more than that. But he did like to watch boxing and mixed martial art events. Those men and women were the ultimate exhibition of discipline. It felt like those memories were bubbling up, and under his strong will, he was beginning to influence his body to follow those movements more fluidly, more perfectly. It wasn't just that, but he felt that it was also a lingering effect of madness control. That feeling of being in perfect control of his body lingered in his thoughts. What if he could be like that all the time? Bang, bang, bang. A rapid-fire series of combos came from Sylas, and it felt like he was briefly flying on a cloud. He wanted to feel that feeling again, but the Titanoboa's head collapsed, not coming back up. Sylas exhaled a breath, his heart beating rapidly. He had gotten really into it just now. He was already good at focusing before, but now it felt like he had taken steroids for his mind. He hadn't even ended up using Blade, Aura, or any other amplifiers. Suddenly, an ache came from his knuckles. After that high vanished, he winced, feeling as though he might have gone overboard. These scorned wraps only provided a plus 10% boost to Constitution, and only in his hands as well. The Titanoboa's Constitution was obviously high as well, so it was like rocks bashing against rocks. Considering the noises they had been making, that might as well have been the case. He reached down and touched the corpse. Titanoboa F. Gene detected. Fragmented gene. 9 strength F. Attempt assimilation? Yes, no. Sylas looked at this screen curiously. The snake's stats were comparable to Middle Madness, but the output of genes was much weaker. It seemed that creatures in dungeons probably provided a better return. Gene assimilation starting. Gene assimilation triggered. Genes successfully assimilated. Fragmented gene. 4. Strength F. Genes failed assimilation. Fragmented gene. 5. Strength F. Gene talent detected. Trade 10 fragmented strength F to unlock tail whip. Yes, no. Sylas frowned. He did remember the whipping tail of the snake was quite powerful, but he didn't have a tail. If he accepted this, would it grow a tail for him? Then he remembered. Didn't he have a treasure he could ask now? He didn't have 10 strength gene fragments right now anyway. He only had 8 total after this victory. Oh, so that's how it works? After giving up another fragmented strength gene, Sylas understood. The genes wouldn't change his appearance, but how well he could use it would depend on the phenotypes he did have. A phenotype was a person's observable traits, and in this case, it referred to Sylas' clear lack of a tail. Sylas looked down at his leg. So I could, theoretically, use it with my leg? That's not a bad idea, if I can find something to protect my shins. The scorned wraps stopped him from using weapons with his hands, and he couldn't wear armor. The latter would make it difficult for him to find something to protect his legs, but it wouldn't be impossible. Who knew? In a world like this, maybe there were kicking experts out there that had their own special weapons to attach to their legs. It hurts to continuously use my fists, but if I don't get used to it, that could be a problem on its own. I can't increase my constitution more than a single point now. I'm already at 49. If this still isn't enough to protect me. Sylas' mind ran through options as he tried to think of solutions. Even if he got tail whip, it would only make his problems worse. His shins and feet couldn't take that kind of punishment. There were methods of strengthening, but it took years of practice, years he didn't have. I need some sort of shield gene talent or skill. I also need to find a way to increase my intelligence. Right now, it's the greatest limiter to my strength. Because of it, I can only use blade, aura, and madness control for a small moment. He set aside the matter of tail whip for now and began his hunt for dexterity builds in earnest. As Sylas moved about, he wasn't stingy with the questions he asked the madness key. By halfway through the second day, all of his physical stats had reached their cap of 50. The distribution of his genes was as follows. Gene state, soft. Fragmented genes, Grimblade lineage, F. 8. Dexterity, F. 6. Constitution, F. 7. Strength, F. Common genes, 3. Speed, F. 3. Strength, F. 2. Constitution, F. 3. Dexterity, F. Gene talents, Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst, F. Tail Whip, F. He had managed to do all of this, even with having to give up a common gene to the madness key. At least for now, he was able to comfortably feed it and ask all the questions he wanted. What was unfortunate was that he still hadn't found any methods of increasing his intelligence. All the creatures he came across could only give physical genes. But this was a natural pitfall. These creatures didn't particularly have high mental stats, and they weren't known for their raw intelligence on Earth either. So not finding genes for intelligence, wisdom, or charisma from them only seemed natural. Maybe he would have to kill humanoid creatures for that. Sylas exhaled a breath. He didn't blink at killing animals, but there was something a bit sour about this. However, he was more pragmatic than he was moral. Those gnolls might provide him with exactly what he was looking for. It was just unfortunate he would have to go looking like this. Castle bonus big thanks to Readable and Rolly Salt. 5 out of 10. Sylas looked down at himself. He was still shirtless, and he wasn't going to find anything to replace it anytime soon. His bottoms were practically barely more than rags at this point, and he was just happy that his dignity at least was well hidden. Other than the key around his neck and the wraps around his hands and wrists, he had nothing else. It'll have to do. Maybe that rudimentary village will have someone who can give me real clothes. He stood to his feet from the stone he was sitting on, tossing a clean bone to the side. He didn't bother collecting the remaining body parts. He had found out the hard way that even forging weapons with his hands would be seen as a slight by the scorned raps. So he could only pick up things that were already weapon-like enough and store them to use as a projectile with his charisma, or leave them be. After a breath, Sylas rushed in the direction of Castlemaine. It wasn't long before it entered his sights. A wetland that was only a few inches of rain away from becoming a swamp appeared outside a clearing of trees. The grass was tall, at least half a foot, and every step felt like he might sink into a muddy quicksand adjacent. Castlemaine was up ahead, and it lived up to the namesake quite well. Not the castle part, but the rudimentary village part. The walls were just posts of wood that were the kind an old, shabby suburban home would have as a fence. The actual village was just 4 buildings. Well, it was more like 1 shack and 3 kind of tents. The mixture of wood and cloth wasn't bad, though. The rest of it, though, were actual tents made of thin beast cloths. Sylas couldn't exactly look down on the appearance. After all, look at him. But what Sylas saw next left him feeling much less reassured. There were 2 groups of people ahead. One group came from where Sylas assumed was the village. He remembered that a city steel came with militia, and judging by the uniform of the men, if you could call it that, they were all of one unit. There were 5 of them, and they seemed to be standing at the ready, not so subtly protecting 2 women. Across from them were 3 people, 2 men and a woman. They stood somewhat together, but from just a casual observation, Sylas could tell that they had likely accepted a quest just like he had. That was because they weren't a unified front like the first group at all. The trouble wasn't this. The atmosphere still looked somewhat harmonious, and there weren't any fights that were about to break out. The issue was what they were wearing. Ow! Was the only thought Sylas could have. They weren't exactly dressed like noblemen and women, but they were dressed much less shabbily than himself, and they even had weapons to boot. Lauren Mitchell, level 1. Physical, 31. Mental, 17. Will, 13. Alex Reynolds. Level 1. Physical, 37. Mental, 13. Will, 9. Morgan Hayes. Level 1. Physical, 47. Mental, 29. Will, 31. Sylas blinked, feeling a bit shocked. He hadn't even run into an option to progress his level. But these people already had? What was more interesting than that was the fact their mentals were so high. He had 122 charisma, yet that man, Morgan Hayes, only had 18 less mental than him. Sylas was immediately curious about what his stat distribution was. He turned his attention to the militiamen. Marcus Tanner. Level 2. Physical, 42. Mental, 22. Will, 12. A level 2. He checked the other militiamen, and they basically all had the same exact stats and the like. Sylas had been so distracted by everything else that he had forgotten to ask the Madness Key about how to level up. He didn't want it for now, but it was probably best that he knew what to avoid so he didn't accidentally ruin his own plans. What do you level up? Creatures that have ascended beyond level 0 will have a gene core within them. This gene core can be used to absorb their genes and convert it into a higher form of ether known as pure ether. Absorbing pure ether can elevate the state of your body and increase your strength. This is known as cultivation by many. So they found a stronger beast. But how do they defeat a beast that powerful if the level 0s I've come across are already so strong? The only explanation Sylas could think of was that they had experiences similar to his own. The difference was that their dungeons gave them actual equipment while his gave him rags. However, Sylas wasn't completely disappointed. Just by their stats, he had come out ahead. If they scanned him, they should see Sylas Grimblade. Level 0. Physical 50. Mental 47. Will 94. Even the strongest of them, Morgan Hayes, didn't have comparable stats. Sylas turned his attention to the two women the militiamen were protecting. Olivia Thompson. Level 0. Physical 32. Mental 21. Will 27. Sylas nodded and moved on to the other woman when what felt like a white light blinded him for a moment. She? Sylas' brows rose. Suddenly sensing something, the woman in the distance looked towards Sylas, and he almost immediately felt something press against his mind as well. But just as quickly, the woman frowned, closing her eyes as her nose scrunched up. Clearly, she had just felt something similar. But it surprised her a lot more than it surprised Sylas. By then, everyone seemed to have noticed Sylas running in from the distance. Several probing touches pushed at Sylas' mind, causing him to frown. It wasn't because he felt that they were rude, considering he had done the same thing just now. It was just that he didn't like the feeling. It was like fingers were poking right at his brain. But all of them reacted much the same as the woman had. Much more violently, in fact. Castle bonus big thanks to Readable and Rolly Salt. 6 out of 10. Alex Reynolds, who had the weakest mental of them all, even physically took a step back, tears falling from his eyes as though he had just been cutting onions. This reaction alone was enough for them to ignore what Sylas was wearing, if that could be considered clothing at all. The woman regained her bearings as Sylas did, and the two looked at one another, a hint of something else in their eyes. Sylas blinked with some surprise. He hadn't been able to tell earlier due to the distance and the fact he could only see the woman's side profile, but the long black hair, those blue eyes, so pale they could be gray, that delicate brown skin that was a shade or two darker than even his own. It looked like this trial-summoned Ascension had taken its toll on her, but her eyes were still quite fierce, much like he remembered them. His mind filled in what the system had missed on its own. Kasari Hale. It suddenly made sense why this place was called Castlemaine. It was just like her to pick such a silly name for something so serious. Kasari blinked for a moment, and then shook her head, looking back toward the adventurers. I guess it's for now, she continued her words from earlier. I'll get the formalities out of the way, and I'll say thank you for coming to the aid of Castlemaine. However, I want to draw a clear line first. You are, indeed, helping my rudimentary village, but you're being rewarded for it by the system. The more you help, the more you will receive. My village is not a charity case, and I have full authority to revoke any accepted quests. If I feel that you are undermining my authority, or that you think you're doing me a favor, I will not hesitate to do so. I hope I've made myself clear. Kasari swept her gaze over everyone. She didn't single anyone out, not even Sylas himself. Sylas didn't mind, nor did he try to press her for attention. Right now, she was a leader, and this was a matter of life and death, not a reunion. Those gnolls would really be out for blood. The two of them hadn't been close for almost a decade. That was practically a lifetime. She had done a lot of growing without the name Sylas Brown creeping in her mind for who knew how long. The fact she was acting like this actually made him feel more reassured. She would be more likely to survive in the long haul. Of course, there was the possibility that he was overthinking things. The odds she had recognized him might be lower than he knew. His own memory was quite good, and he was good at associations, but it had been almost a decade. If it was in a usual setting, the odds that she'd recognize him would probably be just as high. But right now, when he was covered in mud and grime, maybe she didn't. That was fine too, in his opinion. I'll give you a brief overview. The Gnoll village is about 12 kilometers in that direction. We discovered them first, but there's a good chance that they will stumble into us, eventually. I want to take preemptive action, setting up traps around their territory and killing them off one by one until we can eventually conquer the city. There are two problems with this plan. Kasari took a deep breath. The first is their numbers. They had 20 warriors. They're a pure militarized territory. They had no women and children, and their entire population is made up of warriors. The second is their sense of smell. They once had 25 warriors. We killed 5 of them during earlier scuffles. However, due to an unfortunate slip-up, we were unable to deal with one of the corpses properly before it was found. We were forced to change our path back to the village so that they couldn't track us, and managed to kill 2 of the 5 in that pursuit. If we want to deal with that number of warriors, hit-and-run tactics are definitely the best. But we have to be sharp and precise, getting rid of evidence to stop them from tracking us. The last thing I have to tell you is that the physical stats of the gnolls are around 40. If you're not prepared for this risk, please leave now. We will set off for the first mission when the sun rises. They seem to be stronger at night, so it's best we do our work in the day. I will provide food and accommodations. Please make yourselves at home. I will also say just one more thing. I don't want to control you all like some sort of overlord, but you're all smart people to make it this far. Revealing the location of my village to you all is a risk. During the duration of this quest, none of you may leave. After saying this, Kasari gave everyone a final chance to leave before leaving the rest up to Marcus, the first militiaman that Sylas scanned. They were led to a large tent outfitted with bunk beds enough to allow 16 people to rest here comfortably. She must have been expecting more people, or she prepped for the future. The 4 quest takers separated without much of a word, taking up 4 corners as though they all had their own tacit understanding of the situation. Well, all of them but one. Alex threw a sack he was holding to the side and slid back into the thin wooden cot with a sigh. I really can't do this, he suddenly said in a not-so-subtle voice. I get the whole brooding and silent thing you guys got going on. Protect yourselves from potential mass murderers and all, but don't you think we could do better if we actually, talked? Castle bonus big thanks to Readable and Rolly Salt. 7 out of 10. Alex put his hands behind his head, propping himself up just enough to send a look across the room. Sylas and the others were looking at him, but neither of them actually responded. Alex chuckled. Don't look at me like that. Aren't we all insane? A flashing screen appears in front of us, and we actually clicked yes to the madness. Then, instead of picking a nice, cozy city, we picked weapons instead. And look at that guy. Alex pointed at Sylas. He doesn't even have a weapon. It's either he lost it and somehow managed to survive until now without it, or he was actually even crazier than all of us combined and chose that gene thingy. Alex laughed to himself again, as though he was his own favorite comedian. If nothing else, the guy sure knew how to have fun. I'm just saying, the odds of any one of us being a psychopath is pretty high. Sylas raised an eyebrow. He found the guy quite funny. At least he had lightened up the mood a bit. He was right. If they were going to be fighting together, it was best they built some rapport. "My name is Sylas," he responded. "You can call me that if you want." Alex sat up, somewhat surprised. "You actually speak. So you aren't as crazy as I thought." People with antisocial personality disorders, at least the ones you're thinking of, are actually pretty good at blending into social situations, Morgan said with a chuckle of his own before looking at Sylas. "No offense, of course." Sylas waved a hand, indicating he didn't mind. "I'm Morgan," the man continued. He was quite a bit bulkier and more substantial than Alex was, and his voice was deeper. He also seemed to be approaching his 40s, while Alex was much more on the younger side. "You can call me Lauren." The only woman among them spoke in a soft tone. She had the air of the secretary of CEO. She might have been able to be the CEO herself if she wasn't so soft-spoken. She was on the younger side, along with Alex and Sylas. It seemed that they were more common in this trial because both Olivia and Kasari were young as well. Who else but young people would be so reckless? Anyway, it was interesting, though. Given the personality she exuded, Lauren didn't seem like the type to make this decision. But honestly, neither was Sylas. This had always been the illogical decision. "It's nice to meet you all," Alex said with a wide grin. He was almost a hair away from looking like an evil villain who had succeeded in his master plan. "I know I might be pushing my luck, but like I said, exchanging information now is probably the most valuable thing we can do for one another." Morgan sighed. "I get that you're eager, but how about we feel each other out a bit more? We'll be together for several days at the least. There'll always be time. If you give information first, and someone else is unwilling to, it'll only strain our future cooperation." Alex's expression dimmed somewhat, but he eventually nodded in agreement. Soon, he was back to his chipper self. "In that case, let's talk about something else to liven the atmosphere. Did you guys see those 2 bombshells? Especially the tall one. She was giving me dommy mommy vibes." Morgan covered his face with a palm, and Lauren surprisingly laughed. Alex grinned a bit lasciviously. "You swing that way too, Lauren?" Put on the spot, Lauren flushed a bit, but maintained her composure. "No, but I know a beautiful woman when I see one. I wouldn't be so careless with how you speak, though. This is her village, after all. Their militia is powerful." Alex brought a fist to his palm. "That's something else I was wondering about. Those militiamen don't quite seem like us. At least I don't think she recruited them the normal way. I was looking at the city steal option before we all hopped in, and it said you got 5 militiamen for a common city steal. Where do you think those people come from? Can the system just create people?" Alex whispered the last of those words, as though he was scared others might hear him. Sylas looked at Alex with a bit of contemplation in his eyes. This man was definitely smarter than he pretended to be, or at the very least, his candor and openness didn't shroud it. "I was thinking about the same thing," Sylas interjected. "If the system can bring back extinct creatures, there's no reason for it to not be able to create humans from scratch, too." Alex looked horrified when he realized Sylas' words were reasonable. Morgan sighed. "We're too used to pretending we're above all the other animals on Earth, when really we're just another one of them, especially to the people of this summoned Ascension thing." "Especially?" Lauren asked. "Well, just think about it," Morgan continued. "All this gene stuff, fragmented, common, bronze up to legendary. I won't go into too many details, but they clearly don't rank humans very highly on their lists." They fell into silence. Sylas knew what Morgan meant by he wouldn't go into details. Doing so would probably expose what secrets he did have. Sylas himself entered with a fragmented gene, and he was already one of the better ones. Just look at how valuable the Bronze City steel was to the Grimblade family. They treated it like some holy treasure and were having their 3 candidates use this trial as a place to duke it out for its ownership. This one to show just how heavy the prefix bronze weighed in this world, and yet there were so many ranks above it. Whoever had set up this summoned Ascension probably didn't treat humans much differently from the animals Sylas had killed on his way here. Castle bonus big thanks to Readable and Rolly Salt. 8 out of 10. Kasari sat in her chair with a sigh, Olivia coming in not long after her. The insides were quite shabby, and she would have preferred to just stay in a large tent instead. But now there were too many things she had to balance, including public perception. The militiamen weren't the only things the city's steel had spawned. There were real people that actually depended on her now. This world just picked her up and plopped her down in the middle of nowhere, then expected her to forge a path ahead for herself. Honestly, she had leaned toward picking the gene state booster as well, but she figured that she was a woman and had a weaker body, so it would be better if she went this route. She never expected that her physical would have been balanced out with that of the man. If she had known that would happen, she would have never picked this route. Sylas' strength had started off at just 5, which meant he was around the 50 to 60th percentile in terms of strength. Just due to the existence of women alone, this should have been more unlikely than not. He didn't exactly train for strength. He focused on cardio and the like. But as a tall man of his stature, his strength shouldn't have been so weak. If he had a conversation with Kasari, though, he would understand why that was. Most women were at an innate disadvantage in this world, so the system took it upon itself to balance that out, evenly distributing not just strength, but all the physical stats. The fighting hasn't even started yet, and you're already sighing, Olivia spoke with a smile. Between the two women, Kasari was definitely the taller one, by at least a half head at that. Olivia was a bit fairer, but much like everyone on Earth, they both had a tanned richness to them. What was more interesting was their outerwear. Most of the village's funds went to outfitting them and the militiamen, so they wore good leather armor, and they both had weapons sheathed at their waist. As the city lord, though, Kasari didn't do much fighting. As for Olivia, she was much more active. It could be said that they were both very lucky to run into one another. These last 3 months had brought them much closer. Kasari didn't actually have any closer friends, just a bunch of quasi-friendships. But this situation had really pushed her and Olivia together. If Sylas knew that it had been so long, though, it was hard to say how he'd react. It's just continuous, Kasari muttered. We just dealt with the goblin village. Then this one popped up out of nowhere. And we're still no closer to upgrading from rudimentary village to a higher level. Is that really all it is? Olivia raised an eyebrow. Aren't you usually the positive one, while I'm doom and gloom? Kasari muttered something under her breath before she sighed. I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit annoyed. Just met someone I haven't thought about in a long time. Someone. Olivia frowned. There wasn't anyone to meet here unless... Oh, one of the quest takers? You knew one of them? Yeah, the shirtless one. Ah, you always ruin my fun. Kasari was speechless. Didn't you just say you're the doom and gloom? Well, yeah. Why wouldn't I be when there's no dick around here? Kasari burst into a fit of laughter, suddenly feeling a lot better. There are plenty of men in the village. Olivia found a stool and sat on it as defiantly as she could. Yeah, but are they real? Kasari's gray-blue eyes flickered with something. She could feel the weight of that question. It was something almost existential they were all going through right now. Forget all of that. Is he marked territory? You can have him if you want him. Kasari laughed, shaking her head. Don't give me that. I want details. No dick, no romance novels to binge. I'm going crazy here. You're really so interested in a man covered in all that dirt and grime? Get it together, Olivia. Ho ho. Olivia chortled. That had a little extra spice to it. Didn't end well. Kasari rolled her eyes. It ended just fine. We are cordial. So no. Olivia nodded with assurance. That's not what I meant. You can't even see his face all that clearly. But you still recognized him immediately. That's not the point. What is the point, then? Olivia asked with a grin. Nothing. Well, I couldn't see his face all that well, I can't lie. But I saw his body. Kasari rolled her eyes again. Everyone's a warrior now. There'll be six-packs and broad shoulders abound. You need to up your standards now. Yeah, but it won't make them taller, and it won't fix what's down there. Did you not see how loose his pants were? He was swinging that thing everywhere. Olivia spoke, her grin becoming eviler. Now tell me when to stop. Olivia held her hands out, facing her palms toward each other. Then she began to slowly bring them apart. Olivia. Kasari grabbed her wrist before she could continue. Cass. Olivia called out with a hearty laughter. I only saw it once, all right? I don't even remember it, Kasari muttered, clearly not even believing her own words. Only once? Only an idiot would believe that. Kasari sighed. Fine, fine. Olivia scooted forward on her stool, seemingly excited that she had finally wrung the details out of Kasari. We were 17. We never went that far. Oh, a childhood friend? This is even more juicy than I thought. Should have probably stayed that way. Kasari shook her head. We only dated for 2 months, and he broke up with me. What? Olivia stood to her feet as though she was horrified. She looked Kasari up and down. Bullshit, Olivia concluded. Kasari smiled at that. It's the truth. He didn't even get a taste, and he left? I don't even know what to say. Olivia snorted. His loss. I'm sure there was a long line waiting to follow up. That's not the worst of it. Kasari cringed a bit at the memory. Castle bonus big thanks to Readable and Rolly Salt. 9 out of 10. That's not all. I can tell you, but you have to promise not to let it affect your judgment. We were 17 back then, and Sylas. Sylas' way of doing things is different from most people. This isn't high school drama. This is life and death, okay? Don't bring it out of these 4 walls. Olivia's eyes widened instead of answering. That bad, she eventually said, her tone softening. Kasari smiled bitterly in response. Cass, it's okay. You don't need to tell me. I wouldn't have pressed so much if I knew that. It's fine, it was a long time ago. I've gotten over it. It didn't look like she had, but Olivia didn't expose her. At this point, she felt that the situation had changed from her really wanting to know to Kasari finally wanting to tell someone about it. So she promised. I promise. Short of rape, she suddenly said fiercely after starting quite level-headed. Kasari sputtered. Girl, I just said we never went that far. Olivia pouted, unwilling to take her words back. Kasari smiled before her eyes became somewhat distant. He's a little younger than me. His birthday is a month and a half after mine, and right in the middle of summer. I wanted to get him a birthday present, but he already has everything he needs, and I didn't really know what to do. Back then, one of my close friends, Melinda, made a joke about just giving him my body wrapped in a bow. Olivia's brows raised, guessing some things. I brushed it off as a joke, but as I thought more about it, I thought it was a good idea. We had only been dating for 2 months, but I had known him practically my whole life, and I only really thought about losing it to him. So, when his parents were off at work, I came in early with my little get-up. Kasari tried to make it sound cute and lively, but her eyes were already watering. Olivia moved her stool to her side, wrapping an arm around Kasari as she muffled her sobs. When he saw me wrapped up like that, Kasari laughed a little through her tears. You should have seen his eyes. They got as big as saucers. Olivia smiled. We got into it, but Kasari's voice trailed off. But he was really nervous and couldn't really get going, you know? Olivia rubbed Kasari's back, only responding with a nod and urging her to continue. We ended up not doing anything that day, but making out, and I could feel some distance from him. A few days later, he asked me to talk and said that we probably weren't meant for one another and that we should go back to being friends. He said some things about teen birth rates. What? Olivia was aghast. She couldn't help but interrupt. Kasari didn't seem to mind, laughing. I know, she continued. He talked to me like he was a parent lecturing a child, said something about discipline and how we should try to practice abstinence, but how he understood that it was unfair of him to ask that of me if it was something I really wanted to do. So he let me free. Kasari grit her teeth, her tears spilling forth as some of that familiar anger she thought she had long gotten over, came spilling back out. It was like the guy I loved was calling me a skank to my face. I really couldn't take it, Liv. I really hated him back then. Olivia's expression softened, her palms still rubbing Kasari's back. I knew he was like that, so calculative and analyzing about everything. But he couldn't even analyze himself. He preferred to throw it on my lap and make me deal with it. So I lashed out, and I said some really bad things to his face. I called him a weak, small man who couldn't even get it up in front of a hot body like mine. Kasari sobbed harder. It was hard to tell if it was because she regretted saying those words, or if it was because she was remembering the turmoil that brought her to that point. He just stood there and took it, Liv. He even tried to comfort me like he was doing me a service. I told him to fuck off. Then the next week, I pretended to get with some guy he said he hated. I can't even remember that bastard's name. But he ended up spreading all sorts of rumors about me. When I didn't even hold his hand, I just let him take me out on a date and let some people see it hoping that Sylas would regret it and try to get me back. And he didn't. Olivia asked softly. No. He beat the crap out of that guy and got the first strike on his resume. They even suspended him. It was one of those draconian private schools, so they were monitoring our actions even during summer vacation. He sent me a text message later about how he was always available to talk if I wanted because we were friends. Kasari broke down again. She let her forehead fall to her shabby little desk, her shoulders wildly convulsing. She had truly never told anyone this story. She even unfairly blamed Melinda for what happened back then, and she lashed out at everyone. She hadn't had any friends to tell. Olivia's arm wrapped all the way around her as she vented emotions she didn't even know still existed. Months later, I apologized to him for what I said, and that was the last time I spoke to him. It's been almost 10 years since then. I'm sorry, Cass. Kasari sniffled, trying to regain some of her composure. It took a long while, but she eventually blew out a breath, sitting upright again. It's okay, Kasari smiled somewhat bitterly. It was a long time ago. I feel better now. Thanks for listening. Castle bonus big thanks to Readable and Rolly Salt. 10 out of 10. Of course, whenever you're ready to hear about my own traumatic experiences, I'll lay it on you. Kasari snorted. Traumatic. The male species needs their own word for what they put us through, Olivia said righteously. She stuck her chest out and spread her arms akimbo, as though she was truly a valiant hero. Kasari laughed, truly feeling better this time. You sure I can't cut it off? Olivia suddenly asked. Liv, Kasari said, trying to be serious. How about just a little piece of it? Liv. One ball. Liv. Kasari couldn't hold back her laughter, and this time it came in waves. Look at those tits go. Olivia clicked her tongue. We're going to find someone who appreciates those knockers, I promise. The laughter of the two women went into the night. Sylas' eyes opened, and he was immediately alert. This was the first time he had had some real sleep since he came to this world. It could be said that cities had their benefits after all. He wasn't sure about the specifics, but Kasari probably had scouts and things of the like. But he wasn't really thinking about this. His mind was on that dream he had just had. It had been a while since he dreamed about Kasari. It threw him off for a moment. If not for this situation injecting some blood into him, he might have laid here a much longer while. He gave a quick glance around, and it seemed that the only one gone was Lauren. Alex and Morgan were still sleeping. That was a bit surprising to Sylas considering he felt that he was up quite early. The sun wasn't even peeking through yet. After some thought, he lay back down and checked on his gene crystal. Previously, he had already done as the Madness Key stated and found a foundation for his future unique gene. Although he had some options, there were only really two options that made sense. The first was Madness Control, and the second was Madness the Comprehension. The obvious choice was clearly Madness. It was the foundation upon which Madness Control was built upon, and intuitively, a comprehension just felt like a more solid foundation to use. He had even confirmed this with the Madness Key, though such a specific question felt like a waste. The trouble was that he still wasn't sure what path Madness wanted him to take. At first, he had thought it was best used to attack the minds of others, but now he felt that it was best used to control himself. But then there was also the telekinesis aspect that seemed tangential. He still wasn't quite sure if that was an ability he gained just because his will and charisma were so high, or if it was something else. This sort of confusion made it hard to bet on it, especially since it was quite clear that the best he could get out of the gene crystal was a unique bronze gene. By comparison, Madness Control had a clear and obvious purpose to him. It improved his dexterity considerably. Having a related unique gene would be of obvious help. He could have made all of this clearer just by asking the Madness Key, but the last time he asked a madness-related question, it had snapped back. Considering this Madness Key liked ramping things up, the next time he asked one, it might be an even worse punishment. He was on his own for this. But in the end, Sylas stuck with the obvious choice. He wasn't going to try to outsmart a system that was clearly beyond him. He would try to stick with what was obvious to him. And if he made a mistake, he could only do his best to try to correct it later down the line. Plus, he had had another thought when he decided on this. Wouldn't the evolution tree that the common gene crystal formed give him some clues as well? And he was definitely right about that. It had given him 3 options. Basic Etherflow, F. Fragmented gene. Raise genetic limit to 5 common genes of kind. Raise stat limit to 60 relative stat units. Gene talents. Basic Etherflow. Common gene. Raise genetic limit to 10 common genes of kind. Raise stat limit to 75 relative stat units. Gene talents. Basic Etherflow, F. Bronze gene. Raise stat limit to 100 relative stat units. Gene talents. Basic Etherflow, F. Psyche warp, F. Fragmented gene. Raise genetic limit to 5 common genes of kind. Raise stat limit to 60 relative physical stat units. Gene talents. Psyche warp. Common gene. Raise genetic limit to 10 common genes of kind. Raise stat limit to 75 relative physical stat units. Gene talents. Psyche warp, F. Bronze gene. Raise genetic limit to 20 common genes of a kind or 1 bronze gene of a kind. Raise stat limit to 100 relative physical stat units. Gene talents. Psyche warp, F. Harmonic puppetry, F. Fragmented gene. Raise genetic limit to 5 common genes of a kind. Raise stat limit to 60 relative stat units. Gene talents. Harmonic puppetry. Common gene. Raise genetic limit to 10 common genes of a kind. Raise stat limit to 75 relative stat units. Gene talents. Harmonic puppetry, F. Bronze gene. Raise genetic limit to 20 common genes of a kind or 1 bronze gene of kind. Raise stat limit to 100 relative stat units. Gene talents. Harmonic puppetry, F. Basic Etherflow, Psyche warp, and harmonic puppetry. These were the 3 unique genes that it had created for him. But the requirements weren't cheap either. As for the names, they were decided by him after he read their descriptions. Each one had the exact same limit increasers. What really set them apart was hidden in the weeds. Basic Etherflow. Ether comes naturally to you, even when it's outside of your body. Your ability to extend your ether away from your core, attaching it to objects to control and wield, far exceeds others. +5 intelligence, +5 charisma, fragmented, +10 intelligence, +10 charisma, common, +20 intelligence, +20 charisma, bronze. Requirements to unlock, bronze. 5. Strength, constitution, dexterity, speed, wisdom. 10. Charisma. 15. Intelligence. Psyche warp. The minds of others are yours to bend and twist to your pleasure. Feed them illusions, delusions of grandeur, fear the likes of which they've never experienced in their entire lifetimes. +5 will, +5 charisma, fragmented. +10 will, +10 charisma, common. +20 will, +20 charisma, bronze. Requirements to unlock, bronze. 5. Strength, constitution, dexterity, speed, wisdom. 10 will. 15. Charisma. Harmonic puppetry. Your body is your orchestra. Its strings are yours to pluck. Your resistance to the mental assaults of others is unmatched, and your control over your body is unmatched, even if that means exceeding its limits. +5 dexterity, +5 intelligence, fragmented, +10 dexterity, +10 intelligence, common, +20 dexterity, +20 intelligence, bronze. Requirements to unlock, bronze. 5. Strength, constitution, speed, wisdom. 15. Dexterity. 15. Intelligence. Each one had its own merits, and it was actually quite difficult to choose. Basic Etherflow was a huge enhancement to his telekinetic abilities. A large part of the reason he was able to defeat Big Madness was because of those abilities, because getting close had been far too dangerous and his fists weren't nearly strong enough to harm the beast. However, by that same token, Psyche Warp was just as important to him. Without it, he would have died on the first floor of the Slithering Madness dungeon. Being able to deal with enemies without putting himself in any danger was enticing, and both of these unique genes fulfilled that wish. Then there was harmonic puppetry. Its description felt like you were controlling your own body on puppet strings that came from your mind, which was why Sylas had named it as such. This one was enticing for a different sort of reason. That magical feeling he felt while fighting the Titanoboa had occurred again and again on the journey here. That feeling of being able to control your body, making tiny tweaks here and there to make yourself even more perfect, was so enticing to him. It was like the perfect reflection of self-discipline, a form greater than even martial arts. Each one pulled at him, so he could only start dinging them one by one. Harmonic puppetry was appealing, but it was far too similar to Madness Control. The overlap was great, and Madness Control seemed to have a higher ceiling. Psyche Warp was great because it relied on his two highest stats, and also the two stats that didn't seem to have limits attached to them. Well, at the very least, he hadn't hit them yet. But it was also the most hit-or-miss stat. If he met a creature with a high enough will, it would be useless. Of course, that was the case for all stats to a certain extent, like because his constitution wasn't high enough, it was hard for him to harm strong beasts with his fists alone, at least when he didn't use Blade Aura. But he could only use Blade Aura on his body when Madness was activated in the first place. However, he could always fight quality with quantity and patience in that case, like he had against the Titanoboa. Eventually, within reason, his hits are going to hurt. On the other hand, will felt much more cut and dry. Either you had enough or you didn't. Plus, it didn't leave you with much flexibility either. Although Psyche Warp seemed to be evolving toward controlling people, maybe even more permanently, Sylas wasn't sure how he felt about that either. It was a moral conundrum. He could target animals alone, but the conversation he had with Morgan and the others made that feel questionable, especially now that he saw their relative mental stats increasing slowly. Of course, Sylas wasn't some agent of morality. If it was the best option, he would take it. He just had no choice but to nitpick at this point. Then there was basic etherflow. Sylas had added in the word basic on purpose because he felt it was the most scalable of the three unique genes. So long as he had more intelligence, more will, more charisma, his telekinesis would only grow stronger under its effects. Plus, the description of etherflow made it clear that he would even be able to apply his other gene talents to it and synergize. As for the ding on etherflow, well, it was a deviation from his current path. He was using his fists a lot, and he had gained something he could conveniently use his legs with as well. He was moving toward being a pugilist, especially with his unequipable scorned wraps. Could he focus on two things at once? Well, I think that settles it. That reason is horrible because it's a problem that Psyche Warp suffers from as well. Harmonic puppetry is the one that doesn't, but the fact it overlaps with Madness Control so much is too huge of a ding. When Sylas made his choice, he locked it in. Now, he just had to find 50 common genes when all the beasts he had seen until now, aside from the ones in dungeons, only had fragmented ones. Not to mention the fact he had yet to see any wisdom or mental genes. He hadn't received any will genes in the Slithering Madness dungeon, which presumably focused heavily on it. I'll just have to take it one step at a time. The requirement of 50 common genes was only to unlock the bronze unique gene. It scaled down for the common and fragmented ones. But Sylas didn't want to waste this opportunity on a weaker unique gene. Gene crystals were probably even rarer than gene state potions. He needed to optimize his usage. I should go see if I can take a bath or something of the sort. I saw a well earlier. They should have access to fresh water even if it's cold. Sylas preferred cold showers anyway. He wouldn't mind it not being heated. He slipped off of his cot, feeling some of the aches and bruises on his body. But it was already better than it had been yesterday. It seemed that his constitution was doing wonders. The nails on his right hand were already half grown back. Walking out of the large tent, he rounded it, heading toward where he had seen the well. But when he got to the back of the large tent, he heard a splash of water. He looked to the side. There, down in a deep squat, a woman with her back to him threw some water over her shoulder with a cup and almost furiously wiped herself with a rough cloth. He couldn't see much from this angle, but because of her deep squat, he could see some of the curve of her buttocks. But more than that, there were the clear and deep scars she had suffered. It was clear that anyone who could make it so far had dealt with their fair share of struggles. Sylas shook his head and looked away. "My apologies. Lauren was startled and covered her chest. She looked back to see that Sylas was already facing away from her. "No, it's not your fault," she shook her head. "I didn't expect that anyone would be awake this early. I was a little careless. The well has good water. You can use it to clean yourself if you want." That's what I plan to do," Sylas responded. "I also wanted to ask if they might have some spare clothes. I'm in tatters." Lauren laughed, pulling on a towel she had to the side and wiping herself down a bit before wrapping it around her armpits. "You can look now. Don't worry, I'm not such a prude. I've already prepared myself for much worse in this world. Plus, I'm already almost 30. I left that phase long ago." Sylas turned back, mostly out of politeness. Since she had said as much, he would only make her more uncomfortable, insisting on not doing so. Her hair was still wet, but she had a valiantness to her even in such a seemingly vulnerable position. She looked ready to drop her towel and pick up a sword right this moment if she had to, even if it meant going into battle naked. Definitely a woman that had been through a lot. "I think, if we can, we should try our best to hold on to as many of our old traditions as possible," Sylas replied seriously. Lauren blinked, not expecting this response. Then she smiled. "Meaning I should protect my chastity with all my might?" "If that's what you want," Sylas nodded. "I only mean that if you wanted to be a prude, don't let this world change who you are. We have to have our own sort of defiance, even in situations like this one." "I see. That's an interesting statement. You don't look it, but you're quite the rebel." "Rebel? I spent a lot of time as a secretary for people with egos too large to fit through a door. And I'm one of them? Maybe. It would depend on whether you can widen that doorway or be crushed by the archway." Sylas didn't respond, looking at this woman. It was rare that someone would leave him without the words to respond. Lauren seemed to become a little flustered beneath his look and shook her head. "I'm just speaking nonsense, really. Don't mind me. If you don't mind it, you can feel free to use the water I have left. Getting water is difficult in these times, especially with all those bees surrounding the lake and river," Lauren sighed. "It's been months like that. I wonder how many people have died of thirst." Sylas grabbed onto a word she used immediately. "Months." Lauren reacted with surprise. "Did you find another water source?" This was her immediate reaction. If Sylas didn't know about this, then could it be that he was getting his water from somewhere else? That would be huge. Sylas put two and two together immediately. He had been in the dungeon for months? But that was impossible. His soft gene stat was still there, and it would only last for 7 days. Looking at the time, he still had 4 days left. That meant that he could have only used 3 days so far at best. How had months passed on the outside? "No," Sylas shook his head. "It just doesn't feel like it's been that long. I really lost track of time." Lauren sighed. "Yeah, it really is hard without phones and the internet to keep you on track." She shook her head. "Anyway, I'm going to go be a prude now and put on some real clothes." She gave Sylas a smile and walked past him, holding a bundle of clothes in her hands as she slipped back into the tent. Sylas conveniently took the bucket she had used and filled it to the brim at the well. It wasn't like the water was used. This was just the bucket she had been scooping water out of, so he didn't have a problem with using it. He began to clean himself as well, sighing that he still only had a single pair of pants. He should have asked about it last night, but he had to admit that it felt a little weird to have to ask Asari for things. They had ended on good terms, he thought, but that didn't change the fact they hadn't talked in almost a decade. He didn't want to try to take advantage of a former relationship. Everything in this world was earned, and she had worked for months to get to this point apparently, as had the others.